Okay, hello everyone, and welcome on behalf of Dr. Ruth Basinski and all of us here at NICABM to today's live course on how to identify and treat an addiction to pornography with Dr. Robert Weiss. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Schmidt, and staff psychologist here at NICABM. Dr. Robert Weiss is a licensed clinical social worker and certified sex addiction therapist, and also the founding director of Seeking Integrity LLC, which offers residential and online treatment for sex and pornography addiction. He is the author of 11 books, hosts the podcast Sex, Love, and Addiction, and writes a Psychology Today blog entitled Sex and Love in the Digital Age. Dr. Weiss has trained professionals globally, serves as an expert witness in state and federal court cases, and is an adjunct professor at UCLA. You can find out more about his work and offerings at his website, seekingintegrity.com. So without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to our featured expert, Dr. Robert Weiss. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, thank you. Before we get started, so you can see my nice little blank screen. I think we were working on tech this morning. I don't think you guys can see me at the moment, but I will be coming in when we do some Q&A in order to, hopefully, we'll work on our tech issues, but hopefully you'll be able to see my smiling face. I do want to say something to you guys this morning, which is I looked in the mirror this morning and I was horrified. I thought, oh my God, what am I looking at? This old person who just doesn't. And I realized because I've been looking at Zoom for so long with my little appearance touch up that I actually thought I looked like that. So apparently Zoom does me a lot of favors that the mirror does not. But that's a little bit about me and how I talk about me. Let me get started. So let me say to start, and I think it's really important that my perspective on human sexuality has nothing to do with culture, what is believed in Asian culture about sexuality, what's believed in American culture. These are not things that define the work that I'm doing. I don't define my work by morality or religion. My perspective on human sexuality is pretty simple. It's sourced in research, in treatment. It's based on principles of person and situation, which is about being a social worker. And it's addiction and mental health focus, but I think it means focused. So what I'm saying to you is I have no judgments around people's sexuality. I don't make choices. It's not a religious. I don't say this is good or this is bad, unless there is harm, unless there's a paraphilia that is so profound that is harming other people or causing the functionality of someone to fail. Welcome to our tech-adjusted presentation today. So what I wanted you to know, first of all, my PhD is in human sexology, which means I'm a doctorate in the study of sex. And if you have any interest in that, drop me a note sometime. You'll be able to reach out to me. There aren't enough of us, and I think we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So just back to this, I don't have any prejudice about what you do, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy. It doesn't matter to me from the perspective of religion or cultural morality, what you do sexually. What interests me is if it becomes pathological. So if you're causing harm to other people, if your sexuality is causing you to not be able to function, if you have a paraphilia that is destroying your life or the lives of other people, that's when I get involved and say, I think that's a problem. We need to talk about this. But if it comes to just what we might call an alternative form of sexuality, that it's not my job to judge. And I think that's one of the challenges in being a therapist who talks about sex and manages sex, because we have our own feelings, we have our own history, we have our own transference. And to be able to put all of that aside and simply focus on the client's issues, it's reasonably easy in some ways when someone's depressed. But when we have to ask them very concrete, specific questions about sexuality, I think that's when we got caught up in issues that we'll talk about a little bit. So please tell me what you see now.
We can see your slide, perspective
Great.
on human
Fantastic.
Sexuality.
Great. And what do you see now?
Today's porn goes far beyond passive
Excellent.
viewing.
So today's porn goes far beyond passive viewing means I used to think that, porn was, some video. Well, first it was magazines, right back in the day, my old days. And then I thought at some point, it became video. And video meant looking at porn as, you clicked on a video and you watch those images. And I think sometimes when people say, oh, I look at porn, they think of a kind of, stayed image that you're just going through those slides or through that video. But that's not what it is anymore today. So a few things. As you probably know, sexual content is available anywhere at any time. And, I can be sitting on an airplane on my phone and you really don't know whether I'm watching a movie or what I'm watching unless you can see over. So obviously it wasn't something we could do in the past. If I was on an airplane and I was reading a sex magazine, I suppose you'd notice, but now it's pretty easy to hide. Sex apps have brought a whole new way of looking at connection, which means that, and by the way, back in the day, I used to go out and meet someone and talk to them and get to know them. And well, I think you all know that I can hook up with anyone I want who's looking for the same kind of behavior I want, which I actually would have had to go out and find in the past. There are private payments and anonymous use. So when I go online, and if I look at porn, it isn't just the imagery that comes up, that's there, but there'll be a lot of pop-ups of attractive people and it will say, here's Joe, and they'll be live. They'll be in the little corner and it'll say, here's Joe, would you like to talk to him? Or here's Mary, would you like to talk to her? And basically you put in an anonymous credit card and for as long as you wish, you can tell that person to do anything that you want them to do sexually and they will do it in front of you. So usually I'm talking to someone, sadly, who's a sex worker who's in a closet somewhere in another country and they're sitting there showing themselves and I'm paying for that. And that's kind of not what I think people think about when they look at porn. In other words, we don't think about, oh, I'm going to start interacting with people. We're just looking at porn. And that's not really the case. So algorithms are particularly interesting to me because sometimes I wonder how is it that I look for a chair and then all of a sudden I'm looking to buy one and all of a sudden all these little ads and stuff say, are you looking for a chair? Let's all these different companies. So algorithms are kind of the same thing, which means it will, as I look at sexual content, it will zoom in more and more and more on what turns me on. So the viewing becomes much more specific and the algorithm, it's kind of like, I don't know, let's get a good example. It's like gaming, where once somebody begins to know how you want to play, where you play, what kind of things you like to play with, it zeroes more in and more on what you specifically want. So over time, the algorithm determines what I like, what I'm interested in. Now I'm not looking at passive porn. It is recreating and creating and evolving imagery that it knows, the algorithm, the computer knows is what I like. So of course we have global platforms, we have instant reach, and they're mostly all operating off US soil. So whatever ropes we try to put around sexuality, we shouldn't look at this, we don't want to look at that. It's difficult for the government to go after people who are in different countries. I can have immediate contact, as I said, with people online. There's all kinds of, and I don't know if you're aware of this, I certainly see them, where men in particular will get involved with someone who's looking to be taken care of, looking to pay attention to you, to pay me money. And I've had men, send gifts, send cars, send money on a regular basis. There are certainly men, and I would say women, I don't see this as much with women, who are constantly pursuing that fantasy object. And once they find that fantasy object or person, if that person starts to say, oh, I really care about you and I want to be with you. And, there's nothing more, I think, than a porn viewer wants to feel then, oh, I'm the most important person who is viewing me and engaging with me. So the more that sex worker at the other end can say, you're the only one, and you're the one that I love it when you come back, and you're so, I will eventually go to them more and more. If they're looking for money, especially if I'm an older person and I want to feel younger and I'm with a younger person, I can start paying them, and you'd be surprised the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that people spend simply on being able to talk with a younger person who says they find them attractive and they want to be with them. TikTok and the various platforms that also have algorithms that leave you more and more engaged by images you want to see or like seeing will can also provide graphic browsing. In other words, they provide you within that platform to have more graphic imagery to be seen. So let's keep moving. So one of the concerns that comes up for me around porn, and there's a fair amount of research behind all of this, and certainly if you want that, we will provide it for you. But some of the things I see and hear about are confusion about consent. Because when I'm looking at porn, it can often seem like, I want to do this. Okay, let's do this. Or would you do this? And whatever that act is. And if you say, oh, no, I don't really feel like doing that, I will convince you, talk you into, or encourage you to do the thing that I want you to do. In other words, that is the imagery I get in the porn. So the porn tells me it's okay to push someone into something they may not want to do. It's okay to seduce your coworker. It's okay to hit on your brother-in-law. So there is this idea that what we would consider in the real world to say to someone, is this okay? Or even morally or ethically, is this okay? That's all gone. And so the idea, and we see a lot of this, unfortunately, in porn, which is have sex with your stepsister. I don't, in the real world, that might be a problem. But in porn, it offers me the opportunity to feel like I'm getting universal consent. There is, when people are using a lot of porn, they tend to become much less interested in partner communication. Their life and their focus over time becomes about, well, first of all, they're often hiding it. And that cuts off a whole part of them from their partnership because there's a lack of intimacy. And they just kind of shut down and disappear into the behavior rather than focusing on their partner as their focus. So let me say a different thing. So when I work with people who have sexual problems that are compulsive or addictive, and I talk to their spouses, and I say to the spouse, I want you to, write me a note about what your partner's behavior has been troubling to you. And I work entirely with men at this time. So I have women writing in saying, or boyfriends, husbands writing in and saying, this is what I don't like about our relationship and that. Now, I run a sex addiction program. And you would think that the people who are writing notes about their unhappiness with their spouse would say, you did this sexually, and I can't believe you had sex with it. Well, actually, what they write about, 90% of it is, you're not intimate with me. You're not close to me. You're always busy. You're always focused on other things. You don't want to talk about. And so almost universally, what I see in the people who turn away from their partners into this intensity-based experience is they have an opportunity to really shut down and disappear. And their partners get increasingly concerned that they feel more and more alone in the relationships. So we're back to actually watching the porn. I see people engage in behaviors that I don't think most of us might feel comfortable with, or at least we would have to become comfortable with. But if you look at porn, it looks like, oh, you want to do this? Great, let's go do this. And so the impression that a porn viewer, if they're very focused on porn, gets about consent, about pain, about the next line, what is a realistic body expectation? That all becomes blurred. And I have to tell you, for the women that I work with who look at porn, they have expectations of themselves that they're supposed to look like that. And why don't I look like that? And maybe that's what he or she wants, is someone to look at that. So for the partners, it becomes this self-esteem issue, which is, you're looking at that all the time. That must be what you want, and I can never be that. So you must not want me. Um, there is confusion if you look at a lot of porn about what brings a partner pleasure, because I think if you watch porn at all, you can see everyone's just having a good time. There's constant orgasms and everything's great and okay. Well, and it's very sexually focused. We don't see a lot of intimacy building at the beginning or working up toward sexuality. It just sort of happens. And so this idea that we're hanging out, we're spending time together, we start kissing, and all of a sudden we're having sex, it teaches me to miss out on the whole relational piece that draws people together toward having sex. Those people who look at a tremendous amount of porn, and there's good research on this, have much less partner empathy. They see their partners as not being attractive as they had before, and they tend to do a lot of objectifying in real life. So I am so often looking at particular images that when I look at people on the street, they become objects. So rather than my seeing someone attractive as a person, a mother, a friend, or gee, they look good, but whatever that is, now I see them as an object to be pursued or to engage with because when I'm online in porn, people are objects. And so I might carry that through. We do see people that into real life. Um, Sadly, I see and I think we're all seeing an increased tolerance for misogyny. And we have a whole population of young men who feel that women are getting ahead of them in work, in the professional world. They feel like women have too much power. They feel disempowered because they can't have sex with everyone they want to whenever they want. And their lives, for whatever reason, are not fulfilling them or they are not satisfied with the way their life is going. And they focus on women and women become demonized. They're not giving me this and they're not getting, look how they get ahead. And so, and there are communities that are extremely negatively focused on women in particular. And it concerns me. I do write for Psychology. I did write a whole article on misogyny and porn. And there's no doubt in my mind that, well, if you even think of someone you're looking at as an object, then automatically you lose their respect for them as a person. And the respect that I see young men in particular have for women have decreased, for those who look at all porn, has decreased profoundly. Let me just take one step back and say that I've opened programs for 30 years. I've done this work for half my life. And I can tell you that that women do engage in this, and we'll talk a little about women who struggle with porn use. But the majority of the people I work with men are men, and I'll talk to you a little bit later about why men are more drawn to porn. The reason I bring up misogyny is because I think, and I'll have it in the slide a little bit, probably I don't know, 80% or 70, a large percentage of men are looking at sexual content online much more than women. And men tend to objectify and be less relational. So when we're looking at those images, it's much easier to not see that woman as a person, but more see her as simply an object to be used. One of the things that I talk to my clients about frequently when they're having a lot of looking at a lot of porn and that becomes their primary focus for sexuality is they confuse intensity with intimacy. Because when I'm feeling lonely, when I'm having a hard time, well, in my life, when I'm having a hard time, I turn to my marriage of 24 years. When I'm having a hard time, I turn to friends. I self regulate through connection. The people who are looking at porn tremendously have learned, or they don't have the capacity to do focus on intimacy and relational issues because when they are feeling concerned, upset, overwhelmed, they self-regulate by looking at porn. And so if you look at porn, it's exciting. It's excitatory. If the right kind of porn for you, it will distract you. It will feel great. It will feel intensely exciting in a way that maybe a relationship or engaging with someone doesn't. So I have clients who will say things like, well, dating and being sexual with a person is good, but it doesn't turn me on nearly as much as looking at porn. And that's because their immediate response to what they're looking at is excitement and intensity. You turn that computer on or that pad on and you are looking at porn and you are looking at sex. Well, if you want to build a meaningful relationship, it may start out somewhat sexually, but eventually you have to build some kind of relational content and engagement with that person. And many of the men that I work with have become so accustomed to leading into sexuality through intensity and immediate excitement that when they're presented with a real person, they discard or not even aware of that it takes a whole lot of steps to be connected to someone rather than simply moving into sexuality. So I think many of us would look for intensity for connection. For intimacy for connection. At least the healthy ones among us, they look to intensity for connection. And by the way, a lot of them will get very quickly bored with their partners. Because if you're looking at sexual perfection for you, especially if the algorithms are driving the imagery to show you exactly what you want to see. Well, a partner of 15 years, I've seen that butt before. And yet, porn offers me a consistent series all over and over and over again of new bodies and new images and perfect this and exciting that. And, that's just not what partner sexuality is about. Having been married 24 years, I can tell you that I don't turn to my partner and say, "Oh my God, you're so hot and exciting." Sorry guys, if you do, good for you. But my relationship sexuality comes from a much deeper and relate and an emotional place. Doesn't mean we don't have hot sex occasionally because we just want to get it on, but there is a more deep emotional connection that drives me and encourages me to be sexually aroused by a long-term partner than simply what's visual or intensely exciting. And when you're used to looking at people who are perfect and changing all the time, well, your partner, in other words, those people are changing, new ones, new ones, new ones, and your partner just doesn't look as good. And so objectified sexuality becomes what turns you on, not so much relational sexuality or intimate sexuality, if you ever learned that at all. So there's not a lot of time or interest in relational sex. There's very little insight into what that might mean. So many of the young men I work with have never had sex with a person. They have no idea what it takes to begin to develop intimacy that might lead towards sexuality with a person. And I'll give you an example as an older person. When I went to high school, if I wanted to date someone more or less or get to know them, I mean, granted, there were people who wanted to have sex with me right away, but if I liked someone and I wanted to care about them and engage with them, I'd actually have to talk to them. I might actually have to sit down with them. I might actually have to build some emotional intimacy and connection in order to get to the sexuality with someone that I was interested in. Well, if you've never done that, if you have not built up some kind of connection, relational connection, because your access to sex is simply through porn or anonymous experiences, and this happens with a lot of young folks, they don't know how to build intimacy. There was some research in Japan. They were looking at population issues and how we're seeing decreasing populations. And one of the things they did in Japan was they did a study on young men, and they asked them, do you seem less interested, or are you less interested in being sexual than, I'm sorry, how do I say this? If you would choose partner sexuality or staying home and watching porn, which would you prefer? And a large number of them said, well, I'd rather stay home. I mean, people smell funny and you have to talk to them and spend endless time with them, getting them to have sex. And sometimes you take them to dinner and they don't even want to have sex anyway. So this whole idea of relational buildup and giving of yourself and engagement, they don't even have the experience of it. Someone who looks at a lot of porn, they started fairly young, and their experiences were not necessarily that I had to grow any kind of connection with someone in order to be sexual. And in fact, they've never practiced that. When I went to school, I had to learn that if I put my arm around you, you liked it, but if I was more intense with you, you didn't. And so I learned things about sexual boundaries and consent and relational sexuality, that if my primary way of viewing sex is through porn, that I don't learn about any of that kind of connection. The men in Japan said, and it was a majority of them said, well, why would I have sex with another person when I could stay home, I can have a sexual experience, and I can go back to gaming? And believe me, when we start looking at and where we're headed, which is AI and dolls and robotic, and you're never going to leave your house. In fact, just to say it, one of the studies I read recently on populations going down is that we are so ensconced at home. We are so engaged in what's on TV and what's online that we don't actually have the kinds of physical and emotional engagements that might lead to a whole lot more sexuality. And the more realistic the sex becomes as I'm home, the less interested I might become of actually going out and meeting a real person. So, a little bit about porn use by gender. Um, and I think I have the research in this slide. If not, any bit of research you want, I know that you can go through the organization, you can write them a note, and you can say, hey, folks, I'd like some backup research about the things that he's talking about. So in general, and I am speaking in general, men are turned on by stimulation and visual imagery. So we are very visual. This is one of the reasons why porn works for us. It is a constant stream of imagery, and imagery is what really in part turns us on. The other thing that turns men on in particular is new stimulation. You know how you've heard that, kind of, well, if the relationship has gotten kind of boring, go on vacation or do it in the kitchen or find some new experiences relationally that might make your partner more engaged. That's because us guys, we like new stimulation. With a partner, we might want to have new positions, new situations. But if we're out there looking in general, sexually, or just how men operate, we tend to be very focused on new stimulation and very focused on visual imagery. So, in the United States, among people who have been willing to answer, and of course, that's a selective sample, questions about sexuality, 78% of the men report viewing sex at least occasionally. 66 million, or 57%, and again, I'll get the research, viewed porn in the month before they took this evaluation. 15% of them reported themselves as daily users, 20% of them watch weekly, and 80% of regular site visitors are male. So we can see in many ways, and this makes perfect sense when you think about testosterone and what that does, that the primary viewers of porn are men because that's what turns us on the most. Um, and I'll tell you a little biological story in a moment. But women are much more stimulated by the emotional and relational content viewed in porn or body sex. Well, let's just start there. So I see these, I think I remember Twilight or all of these shows and images that were really about relational sexuality and finding this person so exciting and developing, and then they reject me, and then we get back together, and all of this stuff, that is about connection and intimacy. This women really like this kind of intimacy focused, relationally focused. I can show the same porn to a man with no kind of connection, and he'll be very aroused. If I don't include some kind of relational connection between those partners, women will be much less aroused. 40 to 44% of women report viewing porn occasionally or regularly. Many more occasional viewers. Daily use is rare. With women in general, their viewing of porn is often linked to curiosity, or certainly it's arousing for them, or how do I engage with a partner sexually that I might learn about from porn that I didn't know before. And by the way, I think there's a lot of body comparison. So one of the things that women struggle with is I don't look like that. My breasts are not like that. So there's a sense of being disappointed in self, of decreasingly seeing yourself as an attractive sexual object of desire because you look at these other people. And by the way, a lot of those images and those people they start comparing themselves and feel less and less adequate and less positive about their bodies. That, of course, you do. Women are more likely to report mixed feelings or ambivalence about looking at porn. And I think we can come up with a bunch of reasons for looking for some kind of relational connection. And they go online and look at porn. Much of what they're going to find has no comfortable, and it doesn't make sense to them on a whole lot of levels. Now, I'm not saying a woman doesn't go online and have some hot images and go for her orgasm and have a great time. I'm not saying that isn't true. Certainly, it is, but in a primary sense of ongoing interest, women tend to be more focused on the connection. I wanted to say something about biology. Let me go back and just to say something about biology. So, very briefly, one of the challenges that we've had in the field of human sexuality has been our relative inability until the early 2000s to look at the biological nature of sexuality. There has been so much attention, especially through feminism in the 70s and 80s. There's so much attention on men and women are. It's by nurture, not nature, that they are different. So if you give girls pink dolls or trucks, they might want to play with either one. If you give men or young boys pink dolls or trucks, they might pick one or the other. That's not true. The boys are going to pick the trucks and the girls are going to pick the pink dolls. Not all the time. And again, I'm speaking in generalities. But this idea that nature and how we're introduced to content and how we are raised is entirely what focuses us sexually is simply wrong. It's not correct. We also have nature. So testosterone produces a whole bunch of different experiences and ways of looking at the world than estrogen does. Now, I know this happens sometimes, but how many women do you really see looking at a guy on a construction site and catcalling and wanting to get his attention, and then a whole bunch of women whistling? You just don't see that in the same way because men are driven sexually by testosterone to want to see, to want to touch, to want to engage, to want to get attention in ways that women may not necessarily feel. Some other ways of putting it, if you go to the prison system, how many women are there for sexual violations? How many women are there for rape? How many women are there for violent crime altogether? And so you begin to see how testosterone changes and shifts the power dynamic that men experience around sexuality and relationally than it does for women. Now, I'll just give you a silly little example, but it's true from my life. I have two friends who sadly have both have cancer of different kinds. And sometimes, often when men get prostate cancer, they increase estrogen and they reduce testosterone because it reduces the growth of the cancer cells. And I have had men say to me, all of a sudden I'm crying a lot. And all of a sudden, I'm really worried about what these people think of me. And all of a sudden, I really want to get in the conversation. I've heard women say, they put me on testosterone, and all of a sudden I started looking at butts. There were butts here and butts there. And so there are literal changes in the brain and in our bodies based on hormonal change that has nothing to do with the dolls we're raised with the attitudes of our families, with the cultural imagery and what we see. So is nurture important? Absolutely. If I am a respectful father who teaches my children to respect women and be and consider them, in as meaningful equals, I hate to use those words, that's all comes to mind. Then it's obviously going to influence the kind of partner and man that I am. But I'm still a man, and I'm still driven to be sexual in ways that women aren't. By the way, as a gay man, I've got to tell you something because I think this is also kind of unusual. I mean, sort of funny to me, is that women sometimes feel threatened by straight men. They're going to want me. They're going to go after me. They're always looking for, there's sort of that feeling sometimes. So when you laser with us gay guys, you think, oh my goodness, it's so safe. And he's not interested in me and he's not hitting on me and we can be friends. So these guys are not like the guys that I date. Well, let me tell you, put a bunch of gay guys together and have some hot guy walk down the street. And guess what we gay guys do? We start catcalling, we start whistling, because we're men. And so it doesn't even really matter what the object of our attention is. We are still men, and we are going to still express our sexuality and feel our sexuality in different ways than women do, simply because of the hormones. By the way, the reason I said we weren't able to research that is there was so much focus on, really, and it came through feminism in some ways, that women can be just like men, and women can succeed and achieve through assertiveness and all kinds of relational ways that men do. And they can, but that may not necessarily be how women are built. By the way, men are not particularly good at empathy and compassion. By the way, those of you who are married know this, but we're not particularly good at necessarily compassion and empathy and emotional resonance. And there are pieces of that don't have anything to do with the fact that how we were brought up. It has to do with who we are biologically. So what came along in the 70s and 80s was this idea that, women can be just like men. Well, you can't, because you're women. And the way your bodies are constructed and the hormonal responses that you have are different than the ones I have. I cannot be like you, and you cannot be like me. And that concept fading away and allowing the biologists to really look at the biology of sexuality has only come around in the last 15 years. And by the way, the biologists are really pleased about this. So, some misconceptions about porn use. This is a young person's issue. Well, I can tell you, certainly in my practice and the research that I've done, is that 45% of the clients that I work with are ages 50 to 70. And I work in a program where men come in because their sexual behavior has been so troublesome in a non-offending way that it's destroying their lives. A lot of my work, excuse me for being so colloquial, but we consider to be wife referred, which is men come into the program because their partners have put up with so much cheating, lying, anonymous sex, STDs, you name it, that the partner says, I'm not going to put up with this and I'm going to leave you or whatever it is unless you go get some help. But what surprised me in doing this work is I thought that would be all quote unquote younger people who were looking all this online porn. And what I've experienced over the past many number of years is that I walk in to a man who's 70 and he says, I've been compulsively looking at porn since I was 17. So in my mind, the idea that someone my age or older would not be addicted or compulsively looking at porn has simply proved to not be true. Some of the people who say that this is just misconceptions. Some of the people who say they have an addiction to porn or they have a compulsive relationship with porn, there's this concept, well, if I just stop for a period of time, let's say 90 days, then my brain will reset, that I will no longer be driven to look at the porn and want to be with the porn the way that I did, because my brain will have, again, just kind of like when I turn my computer off and turn it back on because it hasn't been running right. There's some way of thinking of that concept. And the reality is that our brains don't reset. They adapt, they evolve, they change. And just because I am looking at something less often doesn't mean that I'm going to all of a sudden not be interested in it or driven by it. Yeah, and I can tell you as a former smoker, when I quit, I'd walk by a bar and I'd walk by that, and boy, did I want to have some of that. Some of that. It took many years for me to not be interested in it all, and then think, oh, it smells awful, because my instinctual experience was when I went by that and smelled it, that's what I wanted to do, no matter how many years I've been away from smoking. So this idea that everyone watches porn is not a problem. Well, that firstly, that's not true. Everyone doesn't look at porn. And if I am frequently looking at porn, again, it can meaningfully affect my functioning in terms of relationship. Now, remember what I do. I work with people whose sexual behavior has gotten out of control. I work with people whose sexual behavior is causing them profound consequences, relationally, sexually, in lots of ways that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the men, and primarily men that I see, they have lost their ability to. They've lost, if they ever had it, their ability to be relational, and the porn simply reinforces that. There's a piece here that I'm going to talk about in a minute, in a little more detail, but what I hear sometimes from people who don't feel good about the porn they're looking at is, well, the porn changed me. I was never into this until the porn showed up, and all of a sudden, this is what I'm interested in. It must be the porn. And porn doesn't create my arousal, it reinforces it. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in just a moment. And for you, psychodynamic and trauma-based therapists, somatic, all different kinds of work, there's a misconception, because I work with compulsive and addictive sexuality. There is a misconception, and I cannot say this strongly enough, that somehow if I work through trauma, somehow if I work through my history and my past, that I will stop acting out sexually. That is simply not true. If you say to me, and think about it this way, if you work through trauma, I know you're an alcoholic, but you're going to stop drinking because we've worked through your emotional issues and you've really come to more clarity and peace, and therefore you're not going to have a need to drink because you're at peace with with what's happened to you. That doesn't sound right. But when we talk about behavioral sexuality, it seems to be this idea that insight and personal development and personal evolution and trauma resolution will somehow change problematic sexual behavior. And I'm going to talk more about this in a bit. But if you want to change behavior, you have to use a behavioral model. Insight is useful and interesting, but I'm still going to get arrested. I'm still going to lose my partner. I'm still going to destroy my work circumstances. I may know a lot about myself, but that doesn't stop the behavior. And if you've got someone who's got a behavioral problem, you have to approach it with a form of therapy that mirrors that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I was saying this a moment ago. Don't blame the porn. First of all, well, I'll tell you about what I was going to say in a second, but I wanted to mention the word superstimulus. So porn is a superstimulus. We have many superstimuli, try if I say that right, in our culture. Something that's a superstimulus simply means that it does not exist in nature. And therefore, and I'll give you an example. For centuries, and longer. There are cultures where someone would chew on a coca leaf. It's much like we'd have a cup of coffee. They were tired, they were doing whatever they were doing, they were working in the fields, and they had some. You've seen pictures of people with cocoa leaves pasted onto their cheeks. And if they got a little tired or overwhelmed, they would just chew on one of those, and they would feel a little peppier and better. But when we turned that into an intensified powder, when we were chemically able to alter the cocaine into a much more intense and non-natural occurring experience, we started to have a lot of problems because cocaine, as we know it, is a super stimulus. Um, so porn is the same thing. So it's not like watching people having sex. It's not like talking about sex. Porn, in the way that people are looking at and engaging it now, simply doesn't exist in nature. And so what you really are doing is appealing to specific parts of someone that may not be drawn out and engaged in the same way if you didn't have these super stimuli. Trying to think of another way of talking about this. I guess a simple way that also crosses my mind is that when I was younger and I went to a gas station and I would go in, my mom would go in to pay for gas. And I remember, what that room was like. There were some tires. It smelled like gasoline. There was some guy in overalls, making change for my mom. And that was basically what going in and paying for your gas was. Well, now I go into a store with hundreds of forms of sugar. There are potato chips, there are candy bars, there's soda everywhere. And so I'm presented with this super stimulus, in other words, with all these varieties and all these choices, primarily based on sugar intake and salt, which we find, because of how we're built, more attractive in the moment. We have an obesity problem in this country. Well, I wonder why. Because when you ate the food that was, even when I was younger, my mom would put out some potato chips on a bowl, and she'd say, "There are your potato chips." I couldn't get bag after bag after bag in the same way that we can now. So presenting naturally occurring experiences in a much more arousing, in a much more stimulating, much more engaging ways that they do not occur in nature, lead people toward being more attractive to it. And porn certainly is a super stimulus because it does not exist in nature. So what are the functions of porn? And this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the porn made me do it. So porn is certainly excitatory, right? It's a super stimulus. It's one not naturally found in nature, and it turns me on. It excites me. It distracts me. I have feelings about it. It engages me. Obviously, porn is what it is, but I work with people who will look at the porn and then they find themselves, and I put that in quotes, they find themselves looking at porn that they never thought they would. Suddenly they're looking at men having sex with men, or they're looking at transsexual sex, or they're looking at, and they say to themselves, I don't like that about myself, or I never saw that in myself before. So the porn must have made me do it. And if I stop looking at porn, then I'm going to stop having those attractions and stop having those interests that I never had before because the porn made me do it. And the reality is that porn is not just excitatory, it's also revelatory. We have an unconscious. There are parts of myself that may be repressed. They may be simply unconscious arousal patterns that once they wake up, they're not going away because I stopped looking at the porn. Once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. So things that I might not have been aware of or connected to feelings and attractions because it simply never crossed my radar internally or externally, like orientation or gender arousal or gender identity. And all of a sudden I start seeing these things and I think, oh, well, that turns me on. Oh, well, I didn't expect that to turn me on. And it turns us on because we're exposed to things we have not been exposed to. But we have this thing called an arousal template. And that is simply the things that turn me on and the things that don't. So I can tell you, I'm a gay man, married to my husband for 24 years, and I'll say that just to say that I'm really proud of that and proud of us. But in any case, what do I want to say about them? Something about my marriage. Hold on a second, I'll get back to it. Oh, I know what it is. So the way I think about porn not being reinforcing of issues that don't turn me on is simply this. I can look at porn with boobs Small boobs, big boobs, large boobs, whatever kind of boobs you want. And you can show me thousands of images of boobs, but you know what? When I look at a woman's breast, I think, oh, she would look good in this, or maybe she should try that color on. So I'm really not interested in that sexually. And you can show me all the breasts you want, and I will never really be interested because I'm not excited by that. That is not in my arousal template. So the idea that if I look at it a lot, I'm going to be turned on by it, and it is the porn that made me do it is simply untrue. There has to be some part inside of me that resonates with, that has some interest, that is a part of my arousal template, even though I may not be aware of it, and that I'm going to be awakened to it, if you will. And, as I said, you can show me all the women's body parts in many ways, and I am not going to be awakened to a part of my sexual arousal template because I'm exposed to it consistently. That's simply not how we work. It's either there or it isn't. So I'm going to talk about a little bit, we'll go into compulsive sexual behavior. And by the way, I do need guidance about when we might stop, because I think we're going to take some breaks and when we're going to
Sure.
answer questions. So I'm going to ask you if you would just, I can't see you waving your hand, but feel free to interrupt me.
So, Rob,
Um,
I'll just orient you real quick here. It would might be helpful to take one towards the top of the hour.
oh, okay.
It could be now. We only have two questions, but
Uh,
also this is a we could just do a really quick one, and also I can talk you through how to stop sharing your screen and make sure your camera's on to start the Q&A. It's an
okay.
opportunity to see you.
Well, who wouldn't want to see me? Hold on
Yeah,
just a second. Sorry. There's my
that's okay.
narcissism. What a surprise. Let's see if I can make this happen. So let's see if you can see me.
Not
Hmm.
yet. Okay, here you come. Great.
I know,
Okay,
here I am. Hi, everybody. I know.
wonderful.
So
Okay, so we
let me
have a
just
couple
say one quick thing.
questions.
I'm sorry
Yeah,
before we start. Excuse me for interrupting you.
sure.
I do a lot of these trainings, and what I find that's interesting to me is when we talk about various issues related to depression, anxiety, family issues, we get a lot of questions. Those of you who teach this work, or we get question after question after question. When I talk about this work, we get a lot fewer. And I have two thoughts about that. One is we're sitting back and saying, huh, what does that mean for me? A graduate school disease. Is that me? It's that me. Am I like that? Also, these are uncomfortable topics to talk about. And so I think sometimes people are less likely to want to put themselves forward and ask questions. And I would really encourage you to take the time to do that, because we won't necessarily know who's asking the question. We don't have to see your face if you don't want to, but I do want to have the opportunity to answer the things that might even make you uncomfortable. So with that, I think this is a good time to take questions, because I'm going to move on to other content in a little bit. So let's see what we've got.
Great. I have three now. First one, does being an active porn user increase the level of testosterone, or is the level of testosterone independent of any such behavior?
My testosterone level is what it is. And I'll tell you, it's not what it was when I was 35. And so I can look at all the exciting images that I want, but that's not going to change my level of testosterone. It will reorient me into, sorry, look, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm on camera. It may reorient me to be more aroused and more focused on arousal. So I may be using the porn in a way that is a convenient distraction, that is where I turn to feel good about myself, excuse me, where I feel the most excited, the most distracted, but it doesn't create changes in testosterone level. I will say this though, if you want to decrease, when you work with a sex offender, one of the things they do in the prison system is they will reduce testosterone and increase estrogen, because they will say, well, if a man is less
Hmm.
sexually aroused, then he's not going to want to do all of those things anymore. He's not going to want to touch children or any of that. The truth is that um, our what turns us on is between our ears. It's not between our legs. So you can actually decrease someone's sexual arousal to zero by changing their neurochemistry, they're still going to be interested in what they're interested in. They just not be, they not may not be able to physically engage in it. So this idea that if you change hormonally, the things that arouse the specific arousal process, that you will somehow become less interested in something, that's really not true. How you act toward it may change. Um,
That makes me want to ask a question. I think this is good. We've got questions about the misconceptions. So, are you saying, because I heard you say earlier, okay, the hormonal component really is a biological shaper for, um, biological men and women.
Arousal, yeah.
Are you saying like the arousal template is exists somewhat independently of hormones, but hormones may be an activator for it? Like, how do we think about that?
What turns me on is not influenced, and I want to make sure I'm answering your question correctly,
Yeah.
is not hormonally influenced. Is that so? Um, most of the research, for example, on gay people, on men in particular, well, on either one of us, I know I had a crush on my high school gym teacher when I was 9. Dom Pellegrini. I'll never forget. He had this big mustache. It was back in the disco days, and men are doing mustaches now again. But nonetheless, and I used to look at that gym teacher, and my hormones at 8 weren't really the same as they were at 25, but my arousal template, what I was attracted to, had already begun to evolve. So, or actually had been there probably since I was very young. In fact, I was going to say that, and I talk too fast and get ahead of my brain when I'm doing presentations. So just let me slow down for a second. Many gay people report having been attracted to same sex when they were 4, when they were 5, when they were 7, long before, when they were 10, long before the kind of hormonal changes that come about in our teen years. So the simple answer is no. My hormones and how they're expressed doesn't have anything to do with what turns me on. And in fact, I'm thinking about, so one of my family members who is a male is becoming a woman, and his primary interest, or her primary interest now, is being a woman. And she has worked really hard. And she, by the way, as a male, was really turned on by women. Well, now she has very much reduced her testosterone, increased her estrogen. She's growing breasts. She's lost her facial hair. But guess what turns her on? Women, just like when she was, I'm speaking a language that's not detected. I don't think that's true. Um, so what she is interested in, even though her hormonal system has changed profoundly, has not changed because because the expression of her body and the way her body is managing its own chemistry is no longer what a man would experience. Does that make sense? So the answer is
I
no,
think, right.
basically.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. Like, what's the arousal template, and how is that different from hormonal impact? How do they interact?
Yeah, I'm writing notes to myself. Um, why don't we keep going, and then I
Yeah,
will.
I'll give you a couple more. One person is asking, in terms of revelatory, how does porn affect the formation? I feel like I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear you say it. How does porn affect the formation of fetishes and non-human attraction? I think you're going to say it doesn't. That's the porn made me do it thing.
Right. So I have a man who had a foot fetish, and we got to a point where actually, so let me back up. Fetishes we're not born with; they're not a part of our early arousal template. They tend to develop um, in our
Hmm.
right before puberty. So, or they say puberty, never got that. But anyway, somewhere between 9 and 11, if you're going to evolve fetishism, that's more around the time prepubescent years. So just very briefly, I had a client who had a foot fetish, and we talked about it, about how it kind of he really kind of thought about how it came about, and he knew. And the way it came about was he had a very, very depressed mother, and he would get up in the morning and she'd be in bed, and he'd come home in the morning and she'd be in bed. But the few times that he would see her feeling really happy was she was sitting at the piano playing the piano, because she was a musician. And so when she wasn't depressed, when she wasn't experiencing those symptoms, she would go play the piano. And so he was so happy to see his mom feeling good, and his mom was back, so to speak. And what he did was he would curl himself around her feet, and he could feel the vibration of the piano, and it was arousing to him. He was curled around her feet. There was a combining, if you will, of that early sense of arousal with the experience that he was having. It's not surprising to me that for the rest of his life, he would now not solely aroused, but that a part of his arousal template related to the imagery that or the experiences he was having just at the beginning of puberty.
Okay. And you would say, would you say that kind of across the board in terms of this person's asking, does porn impact fetishes?
Well,
You're saying it's a different developmental
porn
trajectory.
gives me access to fetishes and fetishistic behavior. I might think to myself, oh, those feet, wow, they're kind of cool. Or wow, she slapped him. But watching it actually happen in the porn gives me a lot of permission to begin to engage in things that I might have thought about or been interested in, so the porn is escalatory. How's that
Mm,
for a word?
okay.
Um,
That's
it, it
helpful.
it it allows me more access and more permission to engage in sexuality that I may have thought about or not felt good about, and then I see it everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, I guess it normalizes would be the right word for it.
Okay. Okay.
So let's keep moving. Other
Yeah.
questions?
I'm going to ask one more and then I'll note a theme that's cropping up, but I think you might address the theme a little bit further into the live course. So, last question for right now. What would you say about or to a porn addict who maintains they can continue using solely as a sexual outlet and not to manage their negative emotional states?
I think that talking about the next steps we're going to take back and forth, because I have some thoughts about how I set this up. But absolutely, we are going to take a lot of time to talk about how does someone manage a problem? What is a problem? If someone gets drunk a lot and they really like drinking, are they alcoholic? Well, they may or may not be. If someone drinks in a way that's self-destructive, they may well be alcoholic. But the fact that if you take the alcohol away from them, they're still going to be desiring the alcohol. And maybe why don't you restate the question one more time? Because I'm not. Let me get it again. I'll write it
Right.
down.
They're asking, what would you say about or to a porn addict who maintains,
Oh, right,
I can keep
right.
using just for a sexual
Sorry.
outlet. It's not about
Right,
managing, it's not about
right.
regulating my emotions.
So I'd say they're an alcoholic. Well, what if you just had a few drinks one here and then? How would that be if you're alcoholic and you're driven to drink? If you have a few drinks now and then, do you think that's going to be okay because it won't lead you back to your alcoholism? Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sex. I'm simply saying that if you engage a behavior that has been problematic for you, it's not going to be minimized once you start re-engaging it. That stimuli, the way your brain has adapted, the dopamine, the serotonin, this is where you go. So once you start down a road, and we can talk about it a lot more later, but what I would say is disconnected, objectified sexuality, that when I start heading down that road, then I'm heading down the road toward I can do what I want. I can do whenever I want. What they don't know won't hurt them. And so my ability to discern becomes my ability to have discernment begins to decrease because of the arousal and the intensity of what I'm engaged in. So we would call that harm reduction. And
Mm.
actually, I do think, and we're going to talk about that dealing with compulsive sexual behavior is harm reduction because it's the same as an eating disorder. We don't say to someone, oh, we say someone's alcoholic, you need to stop drinking, period, or you need to stop doing drugs. We say to a gambler, you need to stop gambling, and but you don't say to someone who has an eating disorder, well, if you just stop eating, and we don't say to someone who has a sexual disorder, well, just stop having sex. We have to define what forms of sexuality are problematic for them and what aren't. And we'll talk more about that. Did that help with
Okay.
that larger question?
I think so.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
because I'm getting
Um,
older and I don't remember stuff. So
what I will know at this point is we have a lot of questions rolling in. They're hard for me to put into one question, but a lot of people ask about trauma. And I wonder if a good thing to say at this point is you're going to be getting into
I am.
how and where to sequence trauma treatment because you
Absolutely.
knew this would come up. So I'm just
Right.
naming that that's in the chat. And then I also see a theme of people asking a lot about co-occurring disorders. And so
We'll get to that too.
that's what
But
I
let me just
thought.
say something about trauma.
Mhm.
I used to think, well, anyone with this kind of compulsive sexual disorder must have been sexually abused. I mean, it happened to you, you're doing it to others. I think maybe 30 or 40% of the people I work with or less have concrete sexual abuse. What I run into a lot more is parental enmeshment. So instead of being used sexually, I'm used in a narcissistic way. That I learned that the way I get my needs met and the way that I feel good about myself is completely focused on taking care of you. And the self dissolves or disappears into what pleases me is keeping you happy and keeping you feeling aroused and good. So basically what I learn is that what's important in my sexuality, it becomes important in my sexuality to feel good about, I feel good when that imagery is making me feel good. I don't know if that makes any sense, but we'll talk more about that. I will tell you that
Huh.
almost to a one, every man I've ever worked with has parental enmeshment without question. That the abuse has been narcissistic. That, and
Huh.
I'll tell you a little of my own story. For example, my mom was bipolar, psychotic, and she hated herself. But boy, I was the glorious little boy that she'd had. And I was the source of her happiness. And she could put me up on a table or show someone my grades and say, look how wonderful my son is. Look at all the great grades he's gotten, because her focus was, what she was really saying is, look how great I am, because I've developed this son that can prove to you how great I am, because look at how he has done, or look how attractive my son is. And I'm not doing it for everyone to say, look how attractive my son is. I'm looking at to say, look how important and valued I am, because as the therapist said to me, I said to him once, my mother must have loved me. I mean, I'd be in a rubber room. And two things he said, never undervalue the importance of intelligence, which thought said a lot about my finding my way out of a troubled family. But the other thing that he said about my mom was, he said, your mom loved me, but she loved her right arm. It wasn't a separate part of her, but she wanted it to be soothed. She wanted to be taken care of. She wanted it to look good, but it wasn't something that was other than her. And the men almost universally that I work with have become profoundly enmeshed and have grown up profoundly enmeshed. Not really having a sense of self and other, but having a sense that self is defined by my pleasing the other, getting the attention of the other, making the other feel good. And my own sense of self disappears into that need to please and that desire to make them feel good, or my anger about that. So I'm not sure if that fully answers the question. Um, we'll go back and talk about trauma. So the answer is yes. I do experience that every client I've worked with has some form of trauma, and it's usually relational, much more than it is sexual.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, I'll leave it there. But we are going
Yeah.
to talk about trauma, and boy, am I glad to talk about trauma. I want to get into
Yeah.
some stuff with these
Yeah.
folks.
So yeah, those are the two things I'll note. And we can transition back to more slides and lecture as people are asking a lot about co-occurring disorders and
Right.
they're
They're
asking a
asking
lot
about the
about
addiction piece, which we'll
mhm,
get to.
yep, and a lot about trauma. And I'll just take this opportunity to say at some point we'll have a quick 5-minute break. I forgot to say that at the beginning, and we can just kind of work together for an organic point to do that, probably about halfway through,
Oh,
somewhere in
okay. So
there or
we're gonna take
ish.
one.
Yeah, just
Okay,
one
great.
5-minute break, but we'll have more Q&A.
So
So
there's
we
a
can,
slide I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's okay.
There's a slide that I didn't put up, and I probably should have, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what is sexual identity, what is gender identity, what is sexual orientation,
Yeah.
and what is sexual expression. And I just want to clarify that because it comes up in the culture a lot with, our younger folks who liquidity, I'm liquid, I am fluid, my sexuality is fluid,
Mhm.
comes up a lot. So very briefly, you may know this. Gender identity is how I see myself. So my niece, I won't mention her name, but let's call her Jane. My niece Jane sees herself as a woman. Now, until she was, I don't know, 15, was a boy. She was a man. And she identified as a man externally, but internally, she always felt like a woman. And so the gender she identifies with internally, that is who I am, is a woman. Even if it's not expressed externally, she feels like she is a woman. So again, gender identity is how I see myself, what gender I see myself as being. So that's internal. Sexual orientation is what turns me on out there. So I'm into men, I'm into women, I'm into whatever it is that I'm into. My orientation to bisexual, to trans, whatever it is, that is my orientation. That's what I'm oriented to. I'm oriented to men. You may be oriented to women. So that's simply what your arousal template is, for that matter. So we've covered gender identity. We've covered sexual orientation. Let's talk briefly about sexual expression. So sexual expression is how the world sees me from the outside. So I could be a woman who exhibits herself in an extremely stereotypic feminine way. I'm very focused on, and I'll give a Marilyn Monroe example, where we see her as a sort of penultimate female figure who exemplifies female sexuality and arousal. That is how she expresses herself. We see her as an expression of sort of ultimate femininity, or what a woman is supposed to be. So, and that is how she's expressing herself. We may have a guy over here who's extremely macho, who's extremely tough, and at that end, that is how we experience him. So the way someone presents themselves to the world in terms of gender, I am extremely male. I am somewhat male. I am male, but um, the way others will see me is about gender expression. So you may see me as it being extremely feminine. You may see me as extremely masculine in the traditional sense. That is expression. So what you see in the world, by the way, how you see me may have nothing to do with what turns me on. It may have nothing to do with how I feel inside about myself. It may be simply how I present myself to the world and what you see. So I see women with strong male sexual expression. I see men with strong female sexual expression. There are men who I used to, and still do, experience as being very feminine. That's just who they are. And I used to look at those men and say, oh, that's a gay guy. Look how he acts. No, in many cases, that was a heterosexual man who had more female gender expression. So even though he was heterosexual and his orientation was to women, he also expressed himself in a way that left up perceiving that he had much more feminine traits. So his orientation is over there to women. His expression is much more feminine, if you will, traditionally feminine, that we would experience him that way. And by the way, his gender identity, he would say, I'm a man and I feel like a man, and that's who I am. So all of these things can be different. And I think we confuse them and conflate them because we simply don't have enough training in that. Any other sort of general questions that you want to, if not, we'll get into let me screen share again. So I'm listening to you.
I think that we are good for now.
So I want to begin to talk about what we would call sex addiction or compulsive sexuality. So I've been doing this for 30 years. And I got to tell you, for the first 20, what I heard was, oh, that really isn't an issue. And what are they talking about? And sex can't be problematic. And they're just making that up. Or even better, the people who have sexual problems, they go, famous ones, they go into treatment because then they can say, oh, poor me, I'm a sex addict. And they don't have to take responsibility for their behavior. So since Patrick Carnes, who's really my role model and began the field, started writing about compulsive or addictive sexuality, he really took the heat around sex can never be an addiction. And there were fights in my field forever until 2018. And in 2018, the World Health Organization came up and they said, we need some kind of diagnosis for compulsive sexuality. And I'm pretty sure that this came out of porn. That what we were seeing with younger people and the degree to which they were being compulsive and distracted and engaged became concerning because, again, we have underpopulation. And so what does it mean if it's significantly affecting the culture and so many more people are jumping online to look at porn, maybe they're so compulsive about it that they're not engaging with real life people. And could sexual behavior and could porn really be a biological and psychological problem, or are we just looking the other way? So the World Health Organization is hand in hand with something we call the ICD, or the International. I'm never going to get this right. The International. It's our diagnostic. One of you needs to bring it up. The ICD is our International Diagnostic Code. So it's basically the DSM plus for everywhere in the world, except I think the US, Canada, and maybe the UK. So the way we diagnose mental health and what we consider to be pathology is really not how the rest of the world sees it. So while we may not acknowledge this behavior, in 2018, the folks who are involved in global diagnostics came up with a definition for what they call a compulsive sexual behavior disorder. By the way, if you look at the ICD, it's not just psychological problems that you see in there. You see every problem of physical and emotional health because they're all coded. So whether I broke my arm or I have a problem with depression, they're all going to be in those same guides with those same numbers and same descriptions. We've separated mental health out from the rest of our health issues in the way that we teach and the way that we talk about it. But in any case, pretty much everywhere in the world, except for the United States, for those places that focus entirely on the DSM, there is a diagnosis called compulsive sexual behavior disorder. And this is a little bit about it. Basically, what it says is impaired, what defines it is impaired control over sexual behavior. The person has difficulty managing the frequency, the intensity, or the focus of their sexual urges, behaviors, or fantasies. And this may manifest as engaging sexual behavior over a longer time than they intended, or they've repeatedly and unsuccessfully tried to reduce their sexual behavior or control their sexual behavior. And I'm not saying, by the way, it's offending. I'm saying it could simply be going to massage parlors. It could simply be hiring sex workers. It could be all kind of, it could be going on apps and constantly picking up and constantly. And the problem for the people I work with is it doesn't simply, they don't develop a different life interest, and they automatically, they get into, a healthy person might get meaningfully involved in a relationship and begin to look at less and less porn. Well, my clients, no matter what's going on with them, they're going to look at increasing levels of porn, regardless of whether they try to stop or there's new circumstances in their lives. So for sex addicts, or let's just call it CSBD, compulsive sexual behavior disorder for the moment, that for those people, their sexual behaviors become a central focus of their lives. So it's so predominant and they take up so much of the time that it detracts from other important life issues like family and for friends and success and all of that stuff. And we'll talk more about that. So I have a few slides on the behavior. So here are the criteria for the ICD-11. Your problematic sexual behavior continues despite negative consequences. And I want you to think about alcoholism or drug addiction or areas where we see addiction as being very concrete. You stop or you start. When I drink, if I drink enough to get in a bunch of DUIs and I, lost my job because of drinking and I've had all these consequences, I might say to myself, you know what, I need to it must be a problem at work. It must be a problem with police who pick me up. In other words, I'm going to externalize the problem because I don't really see me and my behavior as the problem. So I may have negative consequences as an addict, but I externalize them. So I continue to engage in the drinking, or in my case, the sexual behavior, because regardless of the problem it's causing, because I don't or unable to see that the consequences are directly tied to my sexual behavior. So the kinds of consequences they're experienced are physical and emotional harm, social, relational, and work difficulties, marked distress or impairment, meaning the behavior causes me distress. It's negatively affecting my social life, my work life, or other important areas of my functioning. But the distress is not based on moral judgments or what the society would say or religion would say. I'm not distressed because I'm in a spiritual life that says I shouldn't masturbate, and therefore masturbation is bad. The negative consequences, it's because I'm doing it over and over and over again. It is becoming, it's creating real life problems, not just internally, but in the world. So let's continue with the criteria. The duration of the problematic sexual behavior has to have persisted for an extended period, at least 6 months. It has to be excluded from other conditions. We'll talk a little bit about this. So the behavior cannot be explained by another mental disorder like mania or bipolar, or substance abuse. It lives on its own in concurrence or not with those kinds of experiences. It can be concurrent. It cannot be concurrent. We'll talk about that. These criteria highlight that compulsive sexual behavior disorder is characterized by a loss of control over sexual behavior, preoccupation with sexual activity, and distress or impairment in my daily functioning. Let's see. So this is what brings my clients into treatment is they're losing jobs. They are losing relationships. They're unable to focus on school. They are putting themselves in situations of harm. Maybe they're going to places where they could get arrested or in sexual situations that are problematic for various reasons, sex workers, whatever. They're not involved in their children's lives because after work, they go act out sexually and then they don't come home in a time. So there are concrete negative experiences related to my sexual behavior that I am not paying attention to, or I'm externalizing in order to keep engaging in the sexual behavior. Just like I will say, I drink because my wife is so mean to me all the time. And I drink because, if work weren't more difficult, or I drink because, well, let me tell you, you drink if you want to drink. You drink because you want to drink. And I can blame all kinds of things for my drinking. But the truth is, I have a drinking problem, and that the problems in my life are perhaps caused by the drinking problem. My drinking is not an effect of my problems in the world. And so it's kind of the same thing is, my wife isn't having sex with me. My husband is having sex with all these other people. I don't get approval from this person or that person. And so the entitlement, which every addict experiences with, if that's going on in my life, then I deserve to go have as much sex as I want with as many people as I want. That is really my inability to see that the sexual behavior is the problem. My spouse is not distant and angry and unavailable because they're an awful person. They may be acting that way because I'm emotionally unavailable and I'm sexually unavailable and I'm not available for the family. And as I've had many spouses say, I became someone I never wanted to be. Not because I wanted to be this person, because I could not get their attention. I could not get them to pay attention. I would not get them engaged with the family. And then I got anger and nagging. And I became the person that the addict could now say, well, see who I'm married to? No wonder why I act out sexually. And that's kind of a little bit of the world I live in. So I had to learn the meaning of the word nomenclature. And I'm sure you all know it, but I didn't. And nomenclature is the science of naming things. What do we call things? And how do we arrive with those conclusions? And part of the problem, if not a huge problem in my world, is what to call it. So all of these titles or ideas, they have social, they have medical and treatment ramifications, insurance, who you would go see for the therapy, whether you believe sexuality is okay or not okay, or, if I call something problematic sexual behavior, am I discriminating against people? So all of these things have come up in various ways. So some people will say sexual compulsivity. Some people will say hypersexuality. Some people will say hypersexual behavior disorder. Other people will say out of control sexual behavior. Some people will say sexual impulsivity. Some people will say compulsive sexual behavior disorder. And I don't even think I have it up there, but some people will simply say sex addiction. Now, if we can't, and believe me, I have watched my field struggle with this issue for 25 years. In fact, they're still struggling with it. My view being a treatment person is I don't care what you call it. I just want to get to work. I want to see the symptoms and get to work. But for some reason, and I think it has to do with maybe some egos and various ways that people look at the world, there's been tremendous disagreement about what to call compulsive sexual behavior. And therefore, it's been difficult for us to kind of have a common definition come along with a straight line of what treatment might or might not be, because there's so much disagreement about what to call it. And and I'll give you an example. And I think here's one way to think about it. When I go to so what do we call problematic drug abuse and alcoholism in the DSM? We call it a substance use disorder. So I've never seen anyone go to an AA meeting and say, hi, my name is Jack, and I have a substance use disorder. They come into the room and they say, "Hi, I'm Jack and I'm an alcoholic." And so, in the same way, in my mind, the actual clinical way to look at this could be I have a compulsive sexual behavior disorder. And that may be how we look at it and how we outline it in our diagnostic manuals. But if I walk into a 12-step meeting, I'm not going to say, "Hey, I'm Joe and I have a compulsive sexual behavior disorder." I'm going to say, "I'm Joe and I'm a sex addict." So it may be well that how we view these things clinically and what we term them is very different how people in the culture might view them. And so I've worked with people who say it's not sex addiction, it's compulsive sexual behavior. You can't call it an addiction. Well, that may be true, but there's hundreds of thousands of people out there who go to meetings and they call themselves sex addicts. So you can't simply say, "Well, that doesn't meet my research criteria and therefore it doesn't exist." It exists, but it exists in nomenclature, in language that might be different than I as a clinician would talk about it. And again, I can only imagine going to an AA meeting and say, "Hi, I'm Joe and I have a substance use disorder." People would look at me like, what are they in the right room? So it is all in the name in terms of treatment, in terms of how we view it, in terms of symptomology, in terms of whether it is just being sexually prejudiced or all of those kinds of things. But when you go into an addiction world, they simply see themselves as addicts. So, what are sex addicts they're doing? And so, um, I'll get there in a moment. So, the people I work with, for the most part, the ones who are not strictly porn addicts, but who engage in a variety of problem sexual behaviors. And by the way, the behavior itself is not necessarily a problem, it's the way they act it out. So the people that I work with will come in because they're compulsively using porn. And by the way, did you know you could porn for hours and hours and not necessarily masturbate? If you think of that porn as being self-regulatory, calming me down, soothing me, giving me a specific focus on one thing rather than thinking about everything that's going on in my life, well, then I don't necessarily have to masturbate. You might think of it as dissociation. You know, when I find a good program on TV, and I think I've gone through all of them at this point, I'm tired of my streaming services because I've seen all the good stuff. But I could tell you on my worst day, I can really get caught up in some program and I stop thinking about my problems and I stop thinking about what's going on with me because I'm caught up with the screen. It's not that different for someone who has a porn problem in this way because the porn becomes self-regulating, self-soothing, and distraction. And therefore, in some ways, you could say it's not even about sex. It's more about dissociation. It's more about self-regulation. I use the porn for different reasons than you do. And I'm going to get back to the sex addict behaviors in a moment. But I was thinking earlier about what defines the difference in me and an alcoholic. And I think it has to do with secondary gain. So I'm not an alcoholic. If I went out with Megan and a couple of friends to have a drink, well, that would be to relax, to have fun. We'd have a few laughs. Maybe I'd, make a couple of jokes. I'd be more socially comfortable. But the reason I go to drink is to hang out with friends and have fun and feel more relaxed, let's say, get to know my peers or friends better. Now, if you're an alcoholic, you do all of that too, but you have a secondary gain, which is you get to drink and you get to drink and drink and drink because that's what you're really there for. Your primary goal is not to hang out with friends and have fun and be more relaxed or even get drunk once in a while. Your primary goal is to get to the alcohol. And so with the porn addicts that I work with, you and I might watch porn because it excites us or it distracts us or it's a little bit fun or, whatever it is, or maybe it's a regular behavior. But the people I work with aren't simply looking at porn for sexual arousal. They're looking at porn for a secondary gain, which is self-regulation, self-soothing, distraction, dissociation. And that means they're going to return to it over and over again, not necessarily for pleasure, but because it gives them a secondary gain from what they're experiencing emotionally and psychologically. So what are sex addicts out there doing? The men I work with, and I have opened women's programs. So there certainly are women. We'll talk about this a little bit. But primarily the people I see and primarily the people who come to treatment are men. They are hooking up anonymously. They're meeting people online. They're meeting people in hookup apps. And trust me, if you're not familiar with hookup apps, Grindr, for example, as a gay man, or maybe Ashley Madison or one of those other, more popular ones now. I'm revealing myself as an old person because there's certainly newer apps now. But if I was looking at Grindr, I could go into a hotel in New York and I could start looking for sex partners, and it's going to show me sex partners who are all around me, who are looking for sex. Now, if I was out in the middle of Arkansas, in the middle of the country, I might find that there's a sexual partner who's interested in having sex now, but they're 40 miles away or they're 50 miles away. We're on the same app, but they're far away from me. I have to go connect with them. But if you're in a big city and you're on the third floor of the Hilton, there are going to be people on the fourth floor and the seventh floor, downstairs, upstairs, on the street, who are all on the same app, and they're all looking for sex. And it's not unusual for the people that I work with. They're not just trying to hit on one person on that screen. They'll write to 8 of them. And they'll say, I want to have sex with you, and I want to have sex with you. And they'll engage in all those different conversations with all those different people until that person comes along who will have sex with them. So it's really about, how can I get to the sex? And anonymous sex is certainly the fastest way to get there. I don't have to know the person. I don't have to care about the person. I have to be relational. I don't even have to talk to them. I can simply go in their room and have sex, and then we're done with it. Sex addicts are going to adult bookstores. Why don't use that? Sorry, I missed that piece. Let's get back to that. They're going to adult bookstores. They're hanging out in strip clubs. I remember a man that I worked with said that he had to take his some of the people he was in partnership who were in other countries, and they would come here and they'd want to go to a strip club. And so he would take them to a strip club, but he was a sex addict. So he would take them for an hour or two, and then he'd leave the strip club, and they'd go back to the hotel, and he'd ride up in the elevator with them, and he'd say goodnight. And then he'd get back on the elevator and go back to the strip club because he was compelled to do so. And that, to me, would be very typical sex addict behavior. Sex addicts are exchanging sex for drugs, favors for drugs. Certainly, there are addicts who keep drugs around to get people to want to be sexual with them. There are people who are trying to heal from this, and the people who have the drugs are the ones who are having the sex. So it kind of works either way. At either end, I can end up in co-occurring problematic behavior, whether I'm the person who's acting out sexually or I'm the person who is looking to find somebody. It's kind of like waving money in front of someone. Would you like some of this? Well, yeah, but sex is a part of it. So sensual massage parlors, I love the word sensual massage because my clients, words are very important to me. And as an addiction specialist, and I'm a pretty good one, I listen very carefully. So when someone says to me, I'm really trying to get better, I think, really? Well, what if you just wanted to get better? What do you mean you're trying to get better? Because I listen carefully. And so my clients will come in and they'll say, well, I get massages. Like I get really tense. I get a massage. Or really, what is that like? Well, I get a massage and then the person masturbates me. Or I get a massage and then I end up having sex with them. And I say, you know what? That's not sensual massage. That's seeing sex workers. That's seeing prostitutes. They don't want to think about it that way. Because if they had to think about it that way, they'd have to look at what they're doing, and they don't want to. They don't want to see themselves as someone who's going to sex clubs 3 days a week. They want to see themselves as somebody who is enjoying their sexual behavior since they're single. And using the language that is actually what they're doing helps a lot for me to work with denial. And we're going to talk a lot about denial in a little bit. So the people I'm working with, they're consistently cruising, they're intriguing, they're objectifying, they're seducing. And maybe one of the examples I can think about is a man who goes to dinner with his wife, or a man who goes to dinner with his husband, or whatever that mix turns to be. And they're having dinner together, but there's an attractive person right across, his partner's facing him, and he's looking past his partner to the other person who is who's wearing this, who looks like that, and they're attracted. So their partner is sitting there looking at them, talking to them, and they're looking over on the other side of the room, looking at that person. Now, I am a sexual being. I will look at someone and say, oh, they're attractive. That's interesting. That would be nice. And then I turn back and talk to the person I'm with. That's not what the men I work with do. They become hyper-focused on that person or situation they're looking at. And by the way, they're sitting with their spouse thinking, gee, can I get that some person's number? I wonder if they'd go in the bathroom and have sex with me. So they've not only left what we consider healthy objectification, they've gone into obsession. And then in their heads, they're already going into having the sexual behavior. And that kind of thinking it leaves them more excited. So I look at something, I'm a little excited. I start to stare, I get a little more excited. I start to think about how can I engage with them. I start to get more, and I don't mean physically excited, I mean emotionally aroused. And I become less and less interested in the person I'm with, the conversation we're having, the time we're spending together, because I'm really interested is in the stimulation that goes on in my head when I'm looking that way. Um, Sex addicts will push boundaries they view no as a challenge. I will not. I will say that it is unusual, although not completely unusual, for me to run into people who are having non-consensual sex. Non-consensual sex is generally not a sex addiction type behavior. Um, Sex addicts don't want someone to say no. Sex addicts don't want someone to look at them funny. Sex addicts don't want to be rejected. And sex addicts don't necessarily want to force anything on anyone. So while we might view, and yes, I think out of myself, I certainly have these issues. That's why I've been working with this for 30 years. Um, I spent years and years, by the way, learning about sex for myself. And then I spent a whole bunch of years learning about sex from the outside. So I know a fair amount about sex. But in any case, no as a challenge is simply, maybe if I'm more charming, maybe if I'm more give them gifts, maybe. So it isn't I'm going to make you do something or force you into do something. It's more, how can I seduce you into doing something sexually? Um, Sex addicts are having multiple affairs. They're engaged in tremendous amount of infidelity. It's interesting because I'll work with a man who'll say, and I know what's going on when he comes into my office and he says, yeah, I'm really stuck. I'm really don't know what to do. And I'll say, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm in love with this person. I'm in love with that person. And I don't know which one to be with. And of course, the question is not who to be with. The question is, maybe you need to be with yourself. Maybe you're so desperate to be connected that one person isn't enough. And by the way, the people that I work with who are married and also having affairs, they will have that affair and then they'll see sex workers and go sexually act out in the affair. So then they have a spouse and they're having an affair and they're sexually acting out. So you can't say, oh, well, I'm in love with this person and not in love with that person, because even the person you say you're in love with, you're cheating, you're acting out. So it's acceptable to me that affairs are okay, that an honest behavior is okay, but I can blame it on not being with the right person. So sex addicts are sexting, they're abusing social networks for sex, they're engaging in virtual sexuality. And I got to tell you folks, if you're not an AI, you need to be. The ability for me to discern things, to write things, to learn things, I think about going to the library and taking a book and copying it and yellow highlighting it in order to take classes. Well, let me tell you what AI does for me. So what I'm saying is that I will begin, there is a virtual relationship between me and AI. We have a much more personal relationship. It remembers what I've said before. It feeds information back to me when I ask questions. It says, oh yeah, I remember you said this before, and let me tell you. So virtual sexuality, imagery, AR, AI, physical representations, dolls, robotics, this is really where we're headed. And the question is, why have sex with a person? Because those kinds of experiences produce no resistance, no disappointment, no conversations, and by the way, an image on the screen is never going to be disappointed in me. An image on the screen is never going to let me down. One of the things that I think about sex addicts is they have a lot of trouble in interpersonal relationships and they have really struggled with self-esteem and rejection. So if I'm married to you, I'm in a relationship with you, you can hurt me. You can make me feel unloved. You can make me feel unwanted. I can say something to you and you can reject me. And these are, or you might get angry at me. And these are situations I do not want to put myself in. So I will be non-intimate in a marriage, let's say. But when I go out to a sex club or I have sex with a sex worker, I feel fantastic because they want me and they think I'm amazing and nothing I say is too much. But that's because what sex worker is going to say to me, you talk too much? What sex worker is going to abandon me, reject me? So I'm moving toward the situation that leaves me being able to not have to be vulnerable in any way and still feel important and special and like I matter, even because there's no criticism there, there's no judgment, and I'm not vulnerable in a non-intimate relationship the way I might be with a partner. So the people I work with are crossing workplace boundaries. You have the whole Me Too issues. It is typical for a man to come to treatment who's had sex with his coworker, had sex with his secretary. I have physicians who've had sex with their nurses, have sex with their patients, therapists. We get in line for that, massage therapists, all kinds of folks. And so when those boundaries are being crossed, um, I, I will perceive them in ways that are not problematic. Well, she was really turned on with me. She was always flirting with me. She always wanted to be with me. Yeah, but you're her boss. And it doesn't really matter how she is approaching you. What matters is you have the responsibility because you're in the power position. This is what the people I work with lose sight of because they start to feel the vibe of attraction and then they give up. Then it actually goes right past them, the boundaries and rules and all the kinds of things that we're supposed to live in, especially in the workplace now. So, and again, you're going to have to tell me you want to take a break. I think fairly soon. But one of the things I was thinking and I want to
Yeah,
write about is,
we can do that when you find
well,
a moment.
let's finish this slide
Okay, sounds
and
good.
then we'll see what's coming up and I'll have a peek and see. Some people will say, well, how much sex means addiction? I mean, if you do it 3 times a day or 3 times a week, or then must be addiction. And my answer to you is, well, how many drinks make you an alcoholic? Some people can have a few and they're great. Another person, if you ask me, I have a drink and I'm under the table. How much money do I have to lose to have a gambling addiction? Is it $5 or 5,000? How many meals do I have to eat to have an eating disorder? And so it's the same with sexual disorders. It isn't about how much I eat, how much sex I have. It's about the effect that it has on my life. So then people will say, okay, I get it's not about having too much, but maybe it's about if I have sex in this way, or I'm attracted to that kind of person or this kind of situation, maybe that's out of control and that makes me a sex addict. And, I'll say to you, well, if I'm an alcoholic, does that mean I'm only an alcoholic when I drink whiskey, but I'm not an alcoholic when I drink wine? Does that mean if I gamble and I play blackjack that I don't have a problem, but if I play craps, then I do? So really, we don't define addictions by how much or what kind. We define addictions by the degree to which this substance or behavior is diminishing my functionality. It is taking my goals and my beliefs away from me. I am unable to follow up through on my goals and the things that interest me in life because I am increasingly focused on this. So if I am increasingly focused on alcohol, the rest of my life is going to suffer. And if I am increasingly focused on getting to sexuality, engaging with sexuality, finding a few hours a day to do this, I'm not going to be as focused on my family or my work. And so therefore, my life is going to become less functional. People who are not alcoholic and drink occasionally, their life goes just fine. Someone who drinks alcoholic, their life doesn't go just fine because of the alcohol. It doesn't matter what kind of alcohol. It doesn't matter how much they drink. What matters is the effect that it has on their lives. And that's how we define addiction. So, um, there's a lot of material to cover. And so, by the way, this could be a 3-day course. So I'm going to get through a fair amount, and then we'll take questions a little bit later. I wanted to talk about what defines. Well, actually, let me go back a little bit. I'm sorry. Let me go for here. This is where I want to be. So, how can you be addicted to a behavior? And I'm going to go through this very quickly. If I was sitting with you and we were in an earthquake, well, where I live, we have earthquakes. I would notice that your heart rate would increase, your pupils would dilate, your hearing would become more acute, your breathing would become more shallow. You'd start sweating. You'd have this feeling of rush or intensity. And when we're in a crisis, we have reduced intellectual functioning. This is purposeful, right? Because our brain, we want to eliminate all other thinking except how the heck do I get out of this room? I'm not thinking about what I'm having for breakfast or how my friend's doing. If there's an earthquake, I'm thinking about how do I save my butt? And so that kind of singular focus, which comes along with adrenaline, the neurochemistry that comes along with panic, for example, or fight or flight, leaves me, if I'm in pursuit of a sexual experience, less and less able to make good decisions. So getting in the car, I'm a little bit excited. Then I'm driving there. I get more excited, more aroused, more adrenaline, and so more dopamine, more. And so as my neurochemistry changes more toward that fight or flight experience, I'm less and less able to say, this isn't a good idea. I shouldn't be doing this, because I become singularly focused on the behavior. In that way, addiction is kind of like a rock rolling downhill. If you stop at the beginning, it's a lot easier than stopping it at the end. So this is what we're kind of talking about here. So the people I work with, if you're working with an addict, that state of consciousness, they'll call it being in the bubble. They'll say they're in a trance. They say they're feeling spaced out. In my mind, I'm going to think about it as a dissociative state or a trauma state, or certainly a state of self-soothing. But they feel, because of that fight or flight, like they're not there. Like the promises they made to this person and that person, it all fades into the background because the intensity of the focus of what they want to go do. And that is absolutely a biological shift in function. Let's see. So in the 12-step programs, by the way, we have a word for this state of consciousness. It's called powerless, which is I said I wasn't going to, I don't want to, I mean not to, but in the end, I'm going to end up doing it anyway because I don't have any control over it. Now, the people I work with come to treatment for one reason and one reason only, because they're in a crisis. I've had people say to me, "Oh, I'm here in your treatment center because I want to be a better person," or I don't want to parent my kids the way I have," or "You know what, this or that." There's only one reason people come to treatment: they're in trouble. And this is for alcohol, drugs. Nobody comes to treatment unless they are in serious trouble. I'm going to lose my family. I have lost my job. People come into treatment to try to escape or avoid the consequences of their behavior. Once they get there, that's when the work begins. So when people say, "Oh, they just came to get out of their consequences," I'm thinking, well, great, because what matters is they're here. Now, I really have to go into this. This is really important to me, is that if you're going to do this work, you have to be able to talk about sex. I don't know about you, but I was not trained about human sexuality when I went to graduate school. What I was trained with about is there's something like I'm basically looking at everything that's above people's waists and everything that's below, but I don't really look at anything in between. And so when I do a biopsychosocial, and I'm not saying to you that this is concretely the degree to which you need to ask these questions. But when I do a biopsychosocial, an individual assessment or someone I'm going to see, well, what I was taught was you ask them about social relationships, you ask them about school, you ask them about work, you ask them about family, you ask them about all kinds of questions, exercise. Why don't we ask them about sex? Why don't we say, and here's some of the questions I just threw out there, how do you feel about your sexual life? Or do you have any concerns about your sexuality? Or is there anything about sex that you want me to know? Or are there any problems in your sexual life? I don't know about you, but I rarely, if ever, see these kinds of questions. And I don't understand how we can assess for every single thing that's going on with someone's body, their history, their life, socially, relationally, in terms of mental health, and we don't ask about masturbation. I think I have some ideas about that, but I'm just telling you that I think that is problematic in our field. And it doesn't just go with us. It goes along with a lack of education that we have around human sexuality. Now, I understand, and I put this in here, we're going to be uncomfortable with this because when I ask someone about masturbation, when I ask somebody about their sexual life, I got to feel like I'm being intrusive, like I'm making them uncomfortable. I'm afraid that I don't know enough or they're going to see me as judgmental. I have my own shame and discomfort around sexuality. There's transference there. So I'm looking at them and I'm thinking about my own issues and how it affects me and listening to them. And I'm afraid they're going to see me as a voyeur, wanting to peer into their lives. They'll think I'm being seductive or I want to be sexual with them, or they'll become sexually suggestive because I brought this up. And I'll tell you what, anyone that I've really worked with over time, even outside of my field, when I was just doing straight mental health, they were dying to talk about their sexuality. They wanted to talk about the issues. They knew we were asking a bunch of questions. This just fell in with the other questions. It's we are the ones who aren't comfortable. We are not trained enough. We are not comfortable with these issues. And therefore we don't ask, and they don't tell. They're uncomfortable too. They won't be as uncomfortable as we actually say to them, so tell me about this, as if I was saying, tell me about school, tell me about masturbation. And I really ask all of you to think about to what degree do you actually involve your clients when you're assessing, evaluating them in this kind of discussion. So I want to talk about treatment and therapy for just a minute for addictive and compulsive sexuality. There's only one form of treatment that we use to treat behavioral disorders. So if you come into me and you're depressed and you're anxious and you're struggling with something about the past, we can use all kinds of treatment. You can use there are many roads to the same place. But if you come to me and you say you're drinking or you have a problem with your rage, I'm not going to do the same kind of therapy because I have to deal with your behavior, not the past or not how you view yourself. So I threw out a bunch of therapies here, and I'm just going to briefly go over them. So psychodynamic psychotherapy. We look at unconscious conflicts. We promote insight. In trauma therapy, we process trauma. We build safety. We restore emotional regulation. In somatic therapy, we're releasing trauma through body awareness and body regulation. In narrative therapy, we are reauthoring or co-creating personal stories to empower. In Jungian, analytic, Cahutian, and attachment-based therapies, we do all kinds of work. But when you're dealing with someone who has a behavioral issue, you must engage them in a behavioral form of treatment. And so there is really only one accepted and acknowledged and successful form of behavioral treatment, and that's cognitive behavioral. My job is to make the ego syntonic, what this person thinks is perfectly fine, into something that they have learned is not fine. I have to explore and examine their life goals and then put them up against their behaviors. The things that you're doing, do they really mirror the things that you want? What do you want in your life? And is your sexual behavior supporting that or working against it? My job is to look at what someone is thinking and what they're doing and how do they think about what they're doing and what do they end up doing then. My job is to confront distortions. My favorite one is what they don't know won't hurt them. Well, actually, it will hurt them. It'll hurt them emotionally. It'll hurt them psychologically. So relationally, all kinds of harm will be caused. But that means, in my mind, if I can think of it as not causing harm, then I don't have to look at the harm. And so therefore, in cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm going to push you to have to look at your behavior. And one of my favorite stories about this is, so if I have a client who comes in my office and they're in grief, and I'm working them on grief, and I say, here's a little book I think you might want to read on grief. It might help you. Just take a moment with that chapter. And they come back in and they say, it was so painful. And I thought about the book, but I couldn't really read it. And I'm going to say, I completely understand that might have been overwhelming for you. And maybe we're not going to get to that book for a while, but we need to look at XYZ. That would be kind of typical psychodynamic psychotherapy. But if you're an addict and you come to my office and you say, I'm desperately worried about getting help. I need help. It's destroying this, it's destroying that. And I say to you, you know what? I want you to read the first chapter of this book. I think it will be helpful to you. And you come back in the next week and you say, I just didn't get a chance to read it. I'm going to confront you. I'm going to say, I don't understand if you're so desperate to get help and I gave you something to read. Why aren't you reading it? And it seems to me that you probably say to a lot of people, I'm going to do this, and then you don't do it. I wonder how your family members or your spouse feels about the fact that you are someone who makes promises and doesn't keep them. So, right in the moment, I'm not exploring, I'm examining what's going on in real time and how it is affecting me and how it reflects on who that person is and how they act. So this is a challenge for a lot of people doing this work, is that it is a medical model. You are coming to me with a problem and I have the answer. We're not co-creating, we're not exploring. You have cancer and I'm saying to you, these are the things that you need to do to get well. You have diabetes. I'm saying these are the things you have to do to stabilize your blood sugar. Well, if you come to me and you say, I have this problem behavior, then I know some things about it and I can give you direction and instruction. We're not involved in an exploration at that point. You're coming to me because you're desperate for help and I'm going to offer it to you. So the work in behavioral, it's here and now. Every detail matters, what I hear, how they sit, how they address things. I am constantly asking questions. Where did you do? Where did you do it? How did you do it? What did it mean to you? I'm a detective. I'm putting my mind in. I had a client who said to me once, I didn't have sex with my secretary because we went to the Christmas party and then we're talking about how into each other we were. And then I had my hotel room and I invited her up to my hotel room. And then we're lying in a bed together and we were wearing clothes and we started to get aroused. And then we thought, oh, this isn't a good idea. We're both married. And so they agree to not do it and they leave the room. Well, I got to tell you, when a client says that to me, I say, liar, liar, pants on fire, because I can sit there and think of myself being in that circumstance and think, would I just walk away because I didn't feel good about it? There's no way. So I'm challenging, I'm a detective, I'm challenging the story that the client is telling me and looking at the reality of what's probably going on. I'm anticipating that they're going to lie to me. It's so interesting in my world when a therapist says, I thought we had a good relationship. I thought things were working out really well. And then I found out they were still acting out and they didn't tell me. I'm thinking, well, of course they don't, because they're addicts. When someone walks into my office with an addiction problem, I'll say to them, I expect that probably at some point you're going to be lying to me because that's what addicts do. And that's okay. I'm fine with that, but come back and tell me later because I just want to know at some point that you've come to peace, that you're willing to tell me. So I already assume that an addict is going to come into my office lying, minimizing, justifying, rationalizing. And my job is to confront that and to challenge on it. And you might think that someone says, well, I feel insulted, or why do you look at that way? And they may not like me, but they respect me. Because if you're a narcissistic person and you're used to, and all addicts, at least narcissistic in their behavior, what I want is what I want, and what I want is more important, and I'm the one who gets to get it. Absolutely, the theme of narcissism runs throughout addiction. Then I've been able to put up a front to everyone in my life saying, this is who I want you to think I am. This is what I want you to look at me. And I'm able to pull off a lot of lies. I can tell this person, that I'm dedicated to them and I love them, and it looks that way, but really I know that I haven't been. So when you see me as a cognitive behavioral therapist and I see you and I say, you know what? I don't think that's really true. And you know what? I think that's, we need to look, I don't think that you're thinking about that right. They may not be happy, but they look at me and they think, you're the first person who really sees me. You're the first person who isn't falling in for my bullshit. You actually are concerned about me and you're seeing beyond all of my crap that I throw up in the world. And so in many ways, there's a bond because I'm challenging, because I'm confronting, because they can't pull the wool over my eyes. And that is extremely important for someone who's out of control. And maybe this is a good way to say it. I don't look at investigative, insight-oriented kinds of therapy when someone is out of control, because trauma work and that kind of therapy will leave them feeling more anxious and more exposed. I have to provide and help them find a container for their behavior so that they can begin to explore these things without returning to the acting out. I don't want to explore someone's trauma and have them go back to drinking. I have to make sure that they are stable, that they're in sobriety, that they're going to meetings, they have social support. And then when I see them having internalized that, then I can start to push them around other issues, because I know that looking at these issues isn't going to drive them back to drinking. So my job is I'm confronting distortions. I do it with denial. I do it with a lot of humor, and I'm kind of fun. And I'm like someone, you said that, but it meant this. Like, really? You think I'm going to fall for that? I am not dead serious. I'm not a real detective, but I'll joke with them and make fun with them about how hard they work to cover up who they are. So let's see. You asked about trauma. Is it important to explore trauma? Absolutely. I want to know what happened to me. I don't know why it happened. Want to know how I ended up the way I am. And certainly if trauma is challenging my functionality in various arenas, I really do need to work on it or work through it or learn how to manage it. But if if you come into me and you say, well, I'm an alcoholic or I'm a sex addict, and I know that and I'm thinking as a therapist, well, if you just work through the trauma, if you just work through the issues that are going on from the past, you'll stop. Then I don't understand addiction, because I can't possibly look at those issues while the person is still acting out. And so the reason I will explore trauma is to simply as a form of shame reduction. The people who come into my work say I'm an awful person. I've ruined I've done terrible things. I'm not deserving of love. And basically there's a tremendous amount of self-hatred underneath that. If I can get a little bit to help them look at trauma, that they don't act this way because they're bad people. They act this way because of all these things that happen to them, and they've learned to cope and to live the best way they can in this incredibly dysfunctional and harmful way. Then I can move them from self-hatred to curiosity. I can't help a bad person, but I can help a broken person. But am I going to explore it? No, because it's not time to explore it. I know as a therapist, one of the best things I ever learned was just because you hear something doesn't mean you should say it. And just because I hear all the elements of trauma, that doesn't mean I'm going to talk about it. And I'll give you one more example. My clients all come in, they want to know why? Why do I have this problem? What is it about me? What happened to me? And we can go through all of that. I could show them a film of every single thing that's ever happened in their entire life from beginning to end, and they would still drink. And they would still have sex with people they shouldn't, because while they have learned and they have the insight, what they don't know how to do is to stop. What they don't know how to do is regulate what's going on with them in the moment. And I have to teach them that before we have the ability to explore other things underneath. So when I am working with someone and I'm challenging their denial and I'm talking to them about their problem, I have to deeply explore specifics. How many times did you go there? How much money did you spend? Did anyone find out? Were there consequences? Some of the men I work with will think, well, if I won't get a sexually transmitted disease because I only have oral sex. Well, let me tell you, I had people who went out during COVID while we were worried about putting our hand on the cart at the grocery store, and they were having sex with whoever they could find, and then they were coming home. So the degree to which I can deny my consequences, I'm only going to be able to work through that by seeing them more clearly. I have to see who's been harmed, how I've harmed them. Did I try to stop? Did I not? What was I thinking before, during, and after? Everything that happens in that room matters. And I'll tell you an example of this, and this is a tough one for the men I work with. I'll say to them, the ones who are parents, have you been a good husband? Oh, no, I've been a terrible husband. I've done awful things. I haven't been supportive to my spouse. Have you been a good dad? Oh, well, I took the kid to the games and I spent time with them and I was always engaged. I've really been a good dad. And I have to say, well, I'm really sorry, but you haven't. Because if you don't support your spouse, if you leave them feeling alone or anxious or non-intimate, then they're not going to be the mom that they could be. So you may have been indirectly a great dad, but if you don't support the mother of your children, then you're not being the best father that you can be, and you have caused harm to your kids. That is pushing through their denial. I played with them. I spent time with them. I've been a good dad. Well, actually, not necessarily. And they don't want to hear that. But it's certainly, I've said that the work is about moving something that says ego-syntonic, means it's okay with me to do this. My job is to move them from that to it is not okay to do this. And by going through, how is it really affecting work? What did you do there? What happened? What's going on in your family? How do you see yourself as a parent? I'm beginning to break through the way they have been able to look at this as acceptable and move it toward something that is unacceptable. That's my job. So what is sobriety? Sobriety and natural occurring behaviors. It doesn't involve stopping. As I said, it involves shifting behavior. So sobriety and substance abuse means eliminate. I stop. I'm done. If I go back to the drinking, I am I'm no longer sorry. I've had a slip or I've had a relapse. But in behavioral disorders, it's really more about, it can't be about elimination. It's about bringing the behavior into some kind of concrete structure. And that structure has to be brought into the relationship with me. And this creates this self regulation. In other words, and I think I have a simple slide for this. I create a contract with this person. How behavioral is that? And it is based on the behaviors that they want to stop and the behaviors they want to continue engaging in. So, based on their goals and what they want to do and have in life, Lord, I hope this is at the bottom. Here we go. So, everything that I try to help them contain and all of the things that I try to help them move toward is directly related to what they want in life. So, there are no power struggles. If they say, I want to be a better husband and father. I want to get through school and do better. When I confront them and say, I think the porn's a problem. And they say to me, oh, well, you're just being moralistic and whatever. I say, but I thought your goal was to have a better relationship. I thought your goal was to do X, Y, Z. And it seems like your sexual behavior is interfering with that goal. And I want you to have that goal. And I want you to achieve the things that are important to you. And so I'm going to challenge the sexual behaviors that are in the way of that. Now, those behaviors I want to stop. Certainly anything that's non-relational is problematic because I'm so used to objectifying people that I need to be in a more relational place. So things like hiring sex workers, affairs, if you're affairs, sex with strangers, I can think of a million other examples. Going to strip clubs, using porn for some of these people. That may not work toward the goals that they have in life, but what might? And what might is not only about sex, it's about how do they live their lives. Because the people I work with, therefore, I say, what do you do for fun? Well, I have sex. Well, what do you do for recreation? Well, I look at porn. They don't really have a sense of what would bring them joy and happiness. It's so much of their attention is focused on sexuality. So the goals I'm co-creating with them have to do with living their life. It's not just about, yes, you're going to go to 12-step meetings. Yes, you're going to go to therapy. Yes, you're going to meditate. Yes, you're going to journal. But also, what are the things you might enjoy in your life? In AA, they have sober dances. And they do that because people say, oh, I could never enjoy being social and having fun with other people unless I'm drinking. And they go hang out with another bunch of alcoholics and they find themselves having fun without the alcohol anyway. And that is part of my job, is to lead them toward behaviors that engage them in pleasure and feeling good about themselves and having fun and engaging in things. Well, one of my supervisors said to me once, a life well lived is one notch above boring. And I have to agree, a life well lived is just one notch above boring. Good times, bad times, that basically it is what it is. And I have to teach my clients that they're in highs and lows. They're in intensity and then drama and intensity, and that's not healthy for them. What would be healthy is finding means of living that make them feel good, better, sad, but not to the degree that they're used to living with it. So some things for you guys, and I want to go back to some other things. I'm going to be all around today. If you want to do this work, you have to be comfortable with sexual pathology. You have to be comfortable hearing and asking intimate questions about sexual acts. How often do you masturbate? What do you use to masturbate? What are you looking at on the screen? What turns you on and what doesn't? When you're walking into that massage parlor, what do you do to try to get that person to have sex with you? How do you seduce them? What do you expect? I have to be comfortable asking specific things about sex. Their expression. Now, there are things that in the way they express themselves or their behavior and their attitudes we might find offensive. And of course, how you feel about it is not relevant in that way. What is relevant is understanding what it means to the client. Not everyone is cut out to work with graphic sexuality. Not many people are used to or comfortable working with cognitive behavioral therapy. It is not helpful. I'll say it again. It's so important to say, to do trauma work, to do psychodynamic psychotherapy, to do somatic work in a focused way on people who are behaviorally acting out. They don't have the ability to contain the observation and the anxiety that comes up. Therapy in and of itself is anxiety producing. Looking at the past and those kind of issues are even more anxiety producing. My clients will act out if they drop a pencil. So I have to teach them that container, how to get support, how to get social support, how to meet and keep agreements, how to be accountable, how to learn the ways in which I know when I'm falling down that hill and going toward the behavior and how I can stop myself before I start rolling downhill. I have to teach them those things. And again, medical model, you go do this. Here's what you need to look at. Read that book. This is what's going on in a relationship. I'm concerned about it. It's very here and now. It's very cognitive, and it's very much based on accountability and structure and all those things that are required when you work with a young kid. If I'm not comfortable with that kind of model, then I should refer. So therapists, and I struggle with this, we all think that we know the way and that the model we use, it may not be better than the ones that are used, but it's a good one and it works in most circumstances. And that may be true. But when you're working with behavioral problems, alcoholism, drinking, compulsive behaviors, gambling, sex, you have to use a behavioral model. There is no other way. They have to look at what they do, how they're doing it, and what they need to do to stop. And that is concrete and clear. If you can't do that work, and God bless you, you don't have to, but then you should be referring out. Don't think that learning who this person is and the relational aspects of it and looking at their past is going to stop the self-destructive behavior. They don't know how to stop. And that is my job to teach them. So actually, I've got to go back. Excuse me. So there's a whole bunch of slides in here. Can you guys just give me a moment? Sorry. Let me look here. There's something I wanted to talk to you guys about. May we hold on 1 second? Do you guys mind? I'm so sorry. But I feel like I'm getting something that I don't want. Let me look here.
Well, while you're doing
I want to
that,
take questions while we're doing this.
yeah, while you're doing that, someone just said, what was the full sentence of what your supervisor told you? A life well lived, dot, 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 is one notch above boring? What was
Boring.
it?
One notch above boring. Things
Okay.
are good and they're exciting. Someone gets married, you get how great, you go on a great vacation, you fall in love. That's exciting and wonderful. At the other end, people die. There's unfortunate circumstances, life what it is. But most of the time, you're a little up, you're a little down, but basically life what it is. That's not what my clients do. They look for intensity-based behaviors that will completely distract them and they can lose themselves in. And then intensity becomes a norm. And at the other end, they hate themselves, they cause negative consequences. They have huge downs and lows as a result of it. And that's not a healthy life. A healthy life is a reasonable amount of good or reason. My clients don't feel good about going to a wedding. They feel good about how can I get out of this wedding, or how can I hit on this person at the wedding and see if I can get them to go to my room before the wedding's over. They're not sitting and enjoying meaningful interpersonal and life experiences. Their focus is on finding the intensity. And I think that answers that question. Let's keep going while I play with my slides. More questions.
Any chance we could see you? Well, but you have to look at your slides, so maybe not.
Yeah, I'm looking for something in particular.
Okay. All right.
And
Well, I'll
in
still
order to
ask you
do
a
that,
question. Yeah,
go
I'll
for
still
it.
ask a question here. Someone is asking, my experience with addiction and using CBT is that clients learn the theory, but then when they're dysregulated, they can't access it or don't want to. Do you find that CBT is enough for this a sex addiction, pornography addiction? Are there other things you combine with it?
I think that someone who is struggling with their sobriety needs more help. So if someone is acting out and I'm seeing them once a week, maybe I need to see them twice a week. If they're going to 12-step programs, then I need to send them more often. If they are engaging with some kind of situation in the church or whatever situation there is that is asking them to look at and get support for behavior change, I can't expect it to just come from me. And so I will not necessarily say, oh, well, they need to do more of this or less of that. I will, in terms of the therapy work, I will say, gee, what are they doing that isn't giving them enough support to be able to change their behavior? So I'm not going to say if they just get to trauma work, they're going to. Now, there are people who cannot do both of these things at the same time. There are people who can't stop drinking and using because of their underlying trauma. There are people who can't stop sexual acting out before they deal with trauma. But then if they look at the trauma, they're going to act out. So what do I do with these folks? And the answer is some people need to go to treatment centers. Some people need to go to more intensive environments in order to be able to manage their behaviors. They're not able to do both, and some people need to do both. So hopefully that answers that. I'm going to put myself on screen because I want you to see me. Let's do a bunch of questions.
Okay, great. Next one. Someone's saying they combine CBT with the following to be able to look at brain wiring and neuroplasticity. Looks like NF, I'm thinking neurofeedback, sound frequency, motion, EEG. Do you have thoughts on that?
I don't think it's effective in people who have a behavioral problem. I don't think EMDR is going to be necessarily effective when someone is going. It may be effective in reducing the intensity of a trigger toward acting out, and so there may be ways in which some methods. We use a lot of internal family systems, for example, but we're looking at, how do you soothe that child? How do you calm that child inside? Where's that teenager coming out and ruling the roost? So we may use methods that are helpful, but they're ancillary. I think that's how you say that. They are feeding into the ways we're dealing with the problem. They're not actually eliminating the problem, if that makes sense. So my primary form of treatment has to be behavioral. There's just and by the way, this is research based. This isn't my opinion. This is what the research tells us. Is there is very little evidence, if any evidence, that other forms of therapy work with addictions, at least initially.
Great. Couple questions about helping the spouse of someone working through this. Would you be willing to take those? Does that feel too far?
Yeah, I'd love to take those.
Great. There's a little bit of a theme on that. It's people are just saying there's so little support besides 12-step or religious.
Or you right. So let's talk about partners for a moment. I've done this for a very long time, and what I would be dealing with is someone who had destroyed someone's life. Right. When I have a partner who finds out that you've been masturbating 3 times a week and you've been having affairs and we've been married for 25 years, that partner is going to look and act pretty crazy. They're going to be a mess. And I understand that. But when I would see a couple back in the old days, I would see this spouse who was crying and half, just looked like a mess, and they weren't dressed right and they were hysterical. They were a mess. And then I'd look at the addict and they'd say, I really feel bad about this. And yeah, I've acted out this way. And who looks like the crazy person. And so we would focus on these partners and say they're borderline. They have all kinds of their own issues. Look at how they're we didn't look at the other way, which is who wouldn't be a mess based on this set of circumstances. And by the way, this is why we are taught to never assess or evaluate someone when they're in crisis, because who they were 6 weeks ago may not at all be who they are today. So the field has shifted tremendously into understanding and looking at something we call betrayal trauma.
Yes.
And what we're talking about is a rift in attachment. We're talking about a deep and meaningful attachment that has been torn away from me. And so there's a whole set of experiences that are trauma-based that a spouse may go through. And by the way, you want to talk about trauma work, that might be a place to do it. The work that I do with spouses is very different than the work when I do the addicts. The work when I do addicts is very contained, very focused, very here and now, very accountability. The partners don't have an addiction. They're in grief. They're overwhelmed. They need support to come to peace with what's happened. They need support to be able to make sense of it isn't my fault, or all the things they've been told about in sickness and in health. The partners need soothing, regulation. They need to learn how to deal with their anger. They need to deal with what we call ambivalent love, which is I love you today and I hate you tomorrow and I love you today. That makes people crazy. They do need to be in social settings, because if I think I'm ugly and unattractive and that's why you did this, and I see someone who's my age who's an equal attraction, I think, well, they did it to them. So there are social places and environments for partners, and we can come up with a set of resources that I can give you. I don't want to spill them all out here out of my head, but there are certainly resources for partners. And again, I'm hoping that you can pass along some of the resources that we have to folks. But in general, you're right that partners are underserved. Remember the person who goes to treatment for a month and the partner's at home taking care of family, taking care of kids, doing all this stuff. And the addict gets to go off and just relax. I mean, they're relaxing, we're pushing their butt, but nonetheless, they don't have to attend. So partners get the short shift because they're not the ones who are acting out and causing and creating the problem. They don't need to stop something. So our approach to partners is so much more gentle, so much more nurturing, so much more empathic. And the real focus with a partner, if you get there, is you cannot let your self-regulation rely on what that other person is doing. I can't feel good when they're not acting out. I cannot base my stability, my emotional regulation on what they're doing or what they're not doing, because they may act out and I don't want to lose everything that I have inside of me because they acted out. I'll give you an example. There's a woman very quickly I worked with who had been doing this a long time. And about 4 years into their treatment, this woman's husband acted out. And in the discussion in a group, basically one of the other women said, well, if he does that again, I'm going to leave. And if he, that was the de facto answer. If he does this again, I'm going to leave. And of course, my response is, why would he ever tell you that he's done this if the response is he's going to leave? And what we're trying to do is promote honesty. But this woman said something I thought was exactly where I wanted her to be, which she said, you know what, just because he screwed up, I'm not going to give up my home, my kids, my stability in my life because he screwed up. Let him go get some help. And I thought that is really, it's a very hard place to be when you have a romantic and sexual partner, and it's till death and all of that. But there has to be a way to distance myself because that dependency is not reliable. And I'm depending on something that I shouldn't have depended on before, and I certainly can't depend on now. I have to find some way to find my self-regulation within myself into my social relationships with people who can support me. So no, you're not crazy. It's trauma. It's attachment trauma. So let's keep going because I know there's lots of questions. We want to make sure we meet our objectives.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions about partners, so I think that's helpful.
Okay.
Couple treatment questions about the person suffering from this addiction. So one person asking, I think, a really interesting question: how long does it take for a person dealing with porn addiction to recover? And that makes me want to ask, what does recovery even look like?
Well, we'll do one at a time.
Yeah.
How long does it take an alcoholic to get sober? Some people in 2 or 3 weeks, they're there, they're done, they're in treatment. Some people go on years and years and years. Think of how many people who are famous, for example, who I can think of a bunch of them who got sober and their lives are what they want them to be. I can think of a lot of famous people who died from their addictions. So it is really, it's about the person and about their ability, their stability. Someone has more of a personality disorder, maybe a lot more challenging for me to help get them sober than somebody who doesn't have that degree of a personality disorder. So it's very much individual. But I will look at their degree of progress and say, what more do they need to get them to that place where they're stop the behavior?
Mm-hmm. Here's one too. Any thoughts about working with religious patients who report excessive guilt regarding their struggles?
Well, those are two different issues, because if someone doesn't have an addictive disorder and they feel badly about their sexual behavior, I'll give you an example. Let's say I hate myself because I'm interested in men. And I come to you as a therapist and I say, that must be addiction because I'm really interested in men and all I want to do is have sex with men. It's destroying my life and I can't stop doing it. It's ruining my relationships. Well, that's not addiction. That is an ego dystonic orientation issue. So I'm not going to treat you for addiction if the problem is that you're not at peace or can't be comfortable with your sexuality. If you come to me and you say, I want to stop being interested in feet, I want to stop wanting to dress like a woman, it feels compulsive because I want to do it. Well, a lot of things that are sexual I want to do. If it doesn't fit into my religious belief system, then I have to look at my religious belief system. I have to look at who I am. I have to come to peace with the combination of those things. But those are typical therapy issues, which are resolving conflict. But it's not dealing with addiction, even though a person might frame it as addiction.
Mm-hmm. And then would you speak to if someone actually has diagnosable pornography addiction that meets criteria and then has this overlay of religious guilt, is there a certain way you would treat that that's different than what you've said already?
Well, it's interesting because, and I'll give you a different example. Someone will come in and they'll say, I'm gay. I don't know if I'm gay or straight. I don't know if I'm men and women, and I need to figure that out. That's why I act out. And I'm going to say, that's a red herring. Right now, we can put that on the shelf. What's important is you lie, you manipulate, you keep secrets, you do things you don't feel good about. In other words, the whole addictive spectrum is what I'm interested in. We can figure out later, because I can go around that rabbit hole and spend a long time figuring out orientation while they're getting arrested, while they're seeing sex workers, while they're losing their marriages. So I understand how important it is to that person. And believe me, as a sex therapist, I feel it's very important to at least understand and come to peace with who you are. But that isn't the priority if you're drinking. Priority is I have to stop the drinking, and then you can look at some of the underlying issues. And it's the same thing, whether I'm a religious conflict or I'm having an orientation conflict. Or now I will say that I have to pull apart for sure for some people the difference between their beliefs and their behaviors, and look at both pieces and look how they might contribute, because I might have somebody whose compulsivity is driven by what they experience as very rigid sexual control. That may increase or increase their guilt and their shame and their self-hatred, which is going to lead to less self-regulation. So it may be living in this system and acting the way they do is going to escalate because they're living in that system, and it makes them it increases their anxiety more and more. So I have to separate how they feel about themselves and their behavior versus how it relates to how they look at themselves in that structure. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Keep going. We got lots of questions.
All right. What would you do? I feel like I've heard you say pieces of this, but it might help to distill it. What would your position be, or what would you do when a spouse views the pornography use as infidelity, and the other spouse rejects that and says it's not about being unfaithful?
So the question is, how do you define infidelity? What is infidelity? If you put it in purely sexual terms, then I think you miss the point. I can be financially unfaithful. I can take money and that I'm earning and not tell you about it. I can have sex that I'm engaging and not tell you about it. So to me, infidelity involves hiding things from a partner, being unfaithful by living your own life and not telling them what's going on, yet having that affect them. So if I'm spending money that we don't have on what I want and I'm not telling you, that's a form of infidelity. It's financial infidelity. So if I'm out there and having sex with people you know about and engaging in things and you think it's this and I tell you it's that, it's infidelity. So it really has to do with the lack of honesty, the incongruence in the relationship that defines, I'm furious at you if you take money out of the family because you didn't tell me and you didn't. It's really about, so maybe I put it this way. I have a client who comes into my office and he says, you know what? My seeing sex workers doesn't bother my family. It doesn't really upset them. And I'd like to go do that today. And my answer is, well, listen, just go run it by your wife. And if she says, go right ahead and see those sex workers, well, you go right ahead. But if she doesn't like it, maybe you shouldn't do it. And so the infidelity is the belief that I can do this and not tell them, and I'm still being, the infidelity is the lying, the manipulation, the cheating, all of the things around what allows me to do what it is that I want to do. The infidelity is about keeping my partner in the dark. So I break infidelity a long time necessarily. It may have nothing to do with sex. Yeah. Just like intimacy may have nothing to do with sex.
Mm-hmm. What would you say about how to help, or if it's important to help the partners understand why, especially when they're agonizing over why did my significant other do these behaviors?
Well, that's not usually their question. Okay. Their question is, I want to do this and I want to do that. Did you do this or did you do that? And were you with this person and where were you? They want the answer. And you have to understand these people are in crisis and they're in a free fall. If you're a partner, you want to get to just, where is the bottom here? Where do I begin? So they get a little information. They find out about something. And then they have more questions and more questions. And then maybe they find out about something else. And so, in some ways, having all the answers to my question, everything you did, I have a belief that I'll feel better. And so when I don't feel better, I ask more questions. And I don't feel better, and I ask more questions. And then I feel worse and worse and worse, because the asking of questions is about self-regulation. I will feel better if I know everything. And the truth is the more I know, the worse I feel. I think the question would be more, why did you do this to me? Why did you make these promises to me and then break them? Why did you lead me down this road of all of this? You were doing this before we were even married. And yet we got in a relationship and you never told me. I've had spouses say, I would have helped you with the porn problem if you just told me. So it really isn't about, they're not so focused on why. It's more like, how could you? And why did you? Why did you in terms of, why did you lie to me? Why did you keep secrets? In fact, I would say that it is a distraction and a red herring. If I'm an addict and in fact, I prefer that they don't. If I'm an addict and I say, well, I've had a lot of trauma and it's been a really difficult life, and you just have to understand what I've been through. And I try to pull my partner in to feeling sympathetic or empathic toward me. And I pull them away from their own anger and their own distraction by asking them to focus on my pain. Well, I'm not the victim here. I'm the one who violated you and our beliefs and the things. So I don't get to get your empathy, compassion. Now, I do want to go to my therapist and have them say, I'm so sorry this thing's happened to you. I do want to go to my peers and they can say, that must have been really difficult. I can understand X, Y, Z. But I don't want to turn my partner and say, I need you to just feel better about me. And the reason I did all these awful things is because I don't think it matters to the partner. How could you do this to me? You said you loved me. That's what matters. Were you with her? Did you do this with him? They want to know the details. They want to know they are interested in the problem. And they can get pulled away from that by the addict pulling for empathy, pulling for compassion, but that's actually abandoning themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have one more, if that's okay right now, and then maybe you can give us a little more information.
Well, one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure that we cover the questions in the objectives.
Yeah, you bet.
And I can just as easily answer those rather than showing you a bunch of slides. Plus, you get to see me.
Yeah,
now, I will have a couple of resources at the end, or I can even talk through those. So why don't we answer questions? And by the way, I'm someone who likes to race through slides, and then I say at the end, who wants questions? And of course, we're done. So I would rather take the time now. And if you would feed in questions related to the objectives you want to ensure are answered, let's do both of those.
Yeah. So, okay, did it happen? Let me ask this out loud for all of us, differentiating between these contemporary forms of pornography to enhance our clinical understanding of what clients mean when they use that term. Let's just kind of think about that out loud together right now.
So the question is,
that's one of the learning objectives.
Right. Was it explained to you how we might have looked at porn in the past, what it might have meant, and have you begun to learn all of some different ways and some different meanings to what someone would describe as porn? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm just kind of asking out loud, have we met this learning objective?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Right.
And then if people don't feel that way, put something in chat, and it's our opportunity to clarify that right now.
Very nice.
How about explaining that this is another learning objective for the course, explaining the difference between conditioned and innate responses to pornography and the implications for treatment.
So, I'm not sure if this answers the question the way we framed it, but I may like porn and I may enjoy porn, and in situations where my life is not particularly fulfilling because I'm single, or I may find that porn comforts and soothes me, and I may even begin to have a conditioned response to that being the source of how I get my needs met. I have learned that. However, those conditioned responses can be broken. They can be altered when I begin to find things in my life that are rewards. So I'll give you an example. I might have a person I'm working with who's socially inhibited, and they're looking at a tremendous amount of porn. They have conditioned themselves to use the porn as a form of self-regulation, self-soothing, but I draw them out of their social bubble. I begin to engage them in real life. I encourage them and find places for them to get their needs met in a relational way, and then become less than interested in the porn because the way that their needs are getting met out there are beginning to pull away from the self-conditioning they've given themselves to the porn. And by the way, someone's not an addict if you pull them out of that isolation and they start growing more social relations, they start engaging, they start doing, and they're less interested in the porn. So, and I think the conditioning also had to do with, it also has to do with if I look at it, is it the porn that caused it? Am I just become conditioned to what the porn is showing me? And then if I throw the porn away, then the feelings and interests will go away. And that's, as we said, not the case. What was the other end of that question?
It's asking us to differentiate between a conditioned versus an innate response to pornography.
Well, how do I answer that question? We all, sexual imagery is innately arousing to us.
Okay.
It's arousing to all of us. It is innate within all of us to have some kind of arousal when we're faced with various kinds of sexual imagery or sexual situations. Again, I go back to the conditioning comes in when those responses run off the rails, and I be conditioned that doing this it's innate to enjoy sexuality, to want to be sexual, to look at these images. But when I've conditioned myself to use that as an outlet for getting my needs met, then I don't, as I said, I don't use the other opportunities I might have. So we are all aroused, but we don't necessarily turn to that in a consistent way, the porn, to soothe ourselves. The person who is socially isolated, disengaged, they become conditioned to that being the way that they feel better, the way that they have stability, the way that they comfort themselves is by doing that. I can become conditioned to alcohol, where that becomes the conditioned way that I self-soothe and I self-regulate. And the more I drink, the better I feel. And the better I feel, the more I drink. But then I may stop drinking and realize the innate sense of connection, the innate sense of the desire to be honest, to be connected. So I'm not sure if I answered the question exactly, but I'll take it.
I think that helps. And it harkens back to that material in the first hour. I have a lot of people asking about how the concepts of relapse, sobriety, harm reduction do or don't make their way into pornography and sex addiction treatment. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, if you remind me one at a time, that'd be helpful. But I want to talk about harm reduction.
Okay.
So sex addiction and eating disorder treatment is harm reduction. Now, I don't think that it's proved to be particularly helpful from the research I've read that harm reduction really necessarily works with alcoholism and drug addiction because of the neurochemical response that I have when I'm using. And then my body or I become psychologically conditioned to that, to the drinking or the using. But when I stop drinking and using, I will get by. I will do okay. But if I want to create sobriety for someone who's engaging in a naturally occurring experience like eating or sex, we have to define, as I said, what is healthy for them. We have to make a committed contract that this is okay and that's not. And then we have to provide accountability. If you go over here, then you've broken your contract. You've broken your agreement. So basically, sobriety is defined by the agreements and commitments that I make. It's very cognitive behavioral. Here's a list of things that are not okay. My goals are underneath it. Here are my life goals. Does this form of sexual behavior support that, or does it move me away from it? Because as we said, the addiction piece is about functionality. So if my functionality in life, my goals are to have a healthy relationship, this is what will work for me, but everything about my addictive behavior is leading that away from that, then I have to define what is healthy, what is leading me toward my life goals and makes me feel like I'm headed the right direction, and what are the things that distract me from those goals? And so that I want to have a happy relationship. I want to be into it with my partner, but I'm seeing sex workers and having affairs. Well, that behavior is not going to lead you toward this. We need to eliminate those behaviors. Those are the problems. So with eating disorders, maybe going to cafeterias where they have maybe eating, maybe going back to that suck and helping. Maybe there are behavioral things that I need to do to help me disengage from the compulsive eating because I'm keeping myself in circumstances where that doesn't happen. These are based on the choices that we teach people to make in order to stay healthy or to run into what they ran into. By the way, really quickly, a slip is an unintended return to behavior. I wasn't planning it and I didn't mean to. I went out of town and then I engaged in this behavior, but I came back and I talked to my family and I talked to my spouse. I talked to my therapist. In other words, it happened and then I went right away back to, I don't want to keep doing this. A relapse is I do it and I keep doing it and I justify it and I don't tell anybody. And then I'm right back where I was.
Yeah.
Objectives.
Going with that last little piece, I liked that was helpful to hear slip versus relapse. How would you suggest helping partners deal with the relapses?
It's a tough one. It's a really tough one because if someone's drinking, it's not as personal. On some level, I mean, you can say, why are you drinking? You're ruining our lives. But it isn't. You betrayed me emotionally and physically, me. And so to get to a point where it is, you do whatever you're going to do and I'm going to take care of me in a bonded, intimate relationship is really hard because it becomes, if you loved me, you wouldn't do this. If you like the way I look, you wouldn't do this. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, it doesn't matter how good things are. I've worked with people who are, I'm in Hollywood, who you see their face going by on a bus. Like, this is the most beautiful, famous, and they will come to me and say, well, maybe I'm not that attractive because they don't want me. Mm-hmm. I think that hopefully answers your question.
Kind of reminds me of the why. It does feel like there is that kind of implicit why. Like, why are you? It's like I heard you say
the why is what's wrong with me. The why is not necessarily tell me about what happened to you and tell me how you got here. The why is, why don't you want me? Why are you going out there?
Turns it on
why am I not attractive enough?
Yeah.
Why would you lie to me? So the why is about what's wrong with me for the partner. That why comes up forever. And that's how we get to self-regulation, which is it's not about you at all. The drinking is not about you. The gambling is not about you. And the sex is not about you. But what sex and infidelity implies and means to that individual is very different. It's so much more personal.
Yeah. Here is a question. Maybe we could hear how you language to a client that pivot from working on trauma or to focusing on the behavior. How do you couch that to a client who might, or maybe the spouse or the family saying like they need to address the trauma, or it could be a referring therapist saying,
Well, I'm going to say, so this is Dr. Rob being who I am. I know what I'm doing. I know how to do this work. I know how you may be a diabetes specialist. I don't know anything about that, but I know a lot about cancer. So it really is a sense of I am an expert. I know how to do this work. Mm-hmm. I don't think I might, what I'd like you to do is work with me. I want you to continue to be their therapist. I want you to continue to support them. So when I challenge them, when they get upset, when they're struggling to self-regulate, and talk to your therapist about your problems, feeling challenged and angry and self-regulating, but come back to me and we'll talk about the behavior. I have had clients that therapists have worked with doing a lot of trauma work. And then they realize how much that client is acting out. And we talk about having to take that shift away from the trauma work toward the behavioral. And I have to have a therapist say, I'm really sorry. I misperceived the work that you needed to do. Now I realize, because you're acting out all over the place, that we need to put the trauma down for a moment and really discuss. Because, by the way, the acting out is causing more trauma. Right? I mean, who can deal with the past when my spouse is leaving me? I'm getting diseases. I'm losing time. Those kinds of things are, they're traumatic in and of themselves.
Yeah. I like this question, and I bet you will like it too. Someone was really listening. They said, I heard you mention things like humor and enjoying life several times during today. Do you think these play an important role in treating sex addiction?
Absolutely. The issues are serious enough. Look, when I train therapists, and I do 2 days, 3 days a week. I'm so sorry, by the way. I already feel like I wish I'd given you this and I wish I'd given you that. But in any case, when I talk to an audience of therapists and I talk about sex, it can get very serious very quickly. So I have to make you laugh about it. I have to, because it will get in there in ways. And we're not talking about this, but I have to talk about sexual offending. I have to talk about very serious issues that are very
Yeah.
frightening, upsetting to people, and I'm not saying I joke about sexual offending, but I am finding ways where they can hear me. And with the client too. I could say, I cannot believe you did that. Who would do, a therapist might not do it in that way, but then I'd say, I really don't understand how you could do that with your spouse. I might say, boy, you really screwed that one up because I'm making it lighter. They already hate themselves for what they're doing. They already feel tremendous shame. That's already there. If I could lighten it a little bit for them, then maybe I can help them hear it in ways that aren't so self demeaning, I guess is the way I'd put it. I do want to go back to that trauma piece. I want to say it again. We examine trauma in order to take someone from, I hate myself, I'm an awful person, I can't believe I did this, to look at these things that happened to you, no wonder why you ended up the way you are. That is the point of the trauma, to reduce shame, to reduce self-hatred, and help the person see in some ways that anybody would have ended up where they are considering what happened to you. But that doesn't excuse what you've done. You're still responsible for what you've done. And I don't go for anybody. I will not support anyone who says, well, I've had so much trauma. How can I help but act out? That's just not. So I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully that's on the way to objectives. What have we missed? I don't want to feel like I've disappointed
I have
the
gone over
team.
them. I have gone over them, and I think that we are good on the four that we had down. And I've invited people to give feedback in chat if they're feeling confused about that. They are not saying they feel confused. They're just continuing to ask questions. So I think we can just trust that they feel like those
Well,
are
I
the.
do want to say something about training, which is
Mhm.
there is specifically training for, I'm a CSAT, a certified sex addiction therapist. I used to teach the courses, but I still am one. There are probably 15,000 of us now. And when I make a referral in pretty much any city, I want to work with someone who understands addiction. I'm a sex therapist. So most sex therapists might say to you, porn isn't a problem. You just feel bad about looking at porn. Look at more, become comfortable with it. That may be true for people who are very sexually repressed, but my clients need to hear what you're doing is not okay. And so they have to see the specialist who's going to address the problem in the way that they have to properly assess it. Someone might say, well, anyway, I think I've answered that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certified sex addiction therapist. You can look it up online. It is a series of courses. It's pretty intensive. It's a week of training. I think there's 40 to 60 hours of supervision. It's not an easy thing to do, but we know what we're doing. And we have the tools, we have the books, the handouts, the workbooks, because it does take a lot of concrete. How did you get to this piece of thought, and how did it lead to that, and how did it lead to that? And there are very cognitive things that need to be used. So we're trained in that. We know what to use and when to use it. So I do think it is a specialty where you need training, and I don't suggest that a therapist take it on unless they really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And by the way, let me say this importantly: we don't do couples work at the beginning. We don't do couples work at the beginning because basically I have a spouse that says, how could you do this to me? How could you do this? You ruin my life. And I have an addict who says, I'm so sorry I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. I really love you. And there's no place to go with that. So really the addict needs to learn how to stop the behavior, how to contain it, how to come to peace with what they've done. Over here, you have a spouse who needs comfort, self-soothing, and to be able to self-regulate. And so they're not leading with how could you do it with their anger? Because there's nowhere to go there in the beginning. Later on, when they're negotiating the relationship, then there's plenty of room for couples work.
Here's a question that I have. So let's assume most of us are advanced practitioners. We haven't yet and may not go out and pursue the certification you were just talking about. How can we best serve the clients we see individually or in couples? What should we be listening for that tells us, okay, there's something here? Like, should we be asking more assessment questions in the realm of sex, sexuality, how couples are connecting, so that we do better problem recognition and then get someone where they need to go?
I think the problem with couples therapy is that it's not going to come up in the sense that I'm not going to say, oh, I didn't tell you, but I've been cheating on you. But
Right.
where it comes up is he's been cheating on me, she's been cheating on me. And then I probably would want to see them individually. And I'd want to set you up, and because you know that if it's a couples therapist, I never want to keep information from one partner and not tell the other, because that partner's going to say to me, how could you talk to them about it and not tell me? So once I realize there's some degree of once I realize there's infidelity going on, I need to take that person aside and say, tell me more about this, because they're not going to say it in front of their partner. Once we have a clear picture of what's going on, then we can go back and say, okay, let's deal with this issue. So I'm very interested. I'm very interested in in being able to, I'm really interested in not doing the couples work until I really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much I want to teach more. There's so much I want to tell you guys.
Yes.
I will tell you that this is incredibly rewarding work, because I get to see families come together. Trust is never restored. No, I'll never look at that person walking out the door and think, well, they'll never hurt me. They'll always have my back when they go out in the world, because now I know they go out in the world and they've done things to hurt me. I'll never look at them in the same way, and the relationship will never be the same. There are ways that it will grow. The way it grows is honesty. If I have a client who's acted out and they go to their partner and say, you know what, I acted out yesterday, that partner's going to hate it. That partner's going to be furious. Things aren't going to be good. But there's a little part of them that says, they've never been honest with you before. Now they're being honest. And that little piece is what the healing and the intimacy can grow on, is the fact that I can rely on you to tell me the truth. And that goes back to the partners. Why don't I know? What do I need to know? Well, here's everything that you need to know.
And Rob, what would you close out with?
The most important thing we just learn the language of sex. Find a way, even if you're not doing this work, most of us aren't, find a way to make sure that you can comfortably ask questions of your clients without feeling intrusive, without feeling like you're being voyeuristic, because if we say things like, well, I need to ask you about, I don't mean to, and I hope this isn't intrusive, but they're never going to tell us anything. If we said, I'd really like to know about your sexual life, can you tell me more about it? They just think it's part of the interview. They don't see it as being different or strange. So we have to become comfortable with sexuality. And I want to say again, when I went to grad school, there's two things I learned about: addiction and sex. And I went out there as a social worker with families who were in trouble, and guess what they were struggling with? Addiction and sex. So I think that there is a lot of work that we as therapists need to do to learn more about what is a norm, what is not a norm, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what do we call things, how do we interview people. We can do it around almost any other issue, but for some reason, this information and the way we look at it is not built into our education. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate all those sentiments, and you ended right on the hour. And so it's our opportunity to say thank you very much, Rob, for being with us. People are writing in the chat. Thank you. Thank you for this training. So I want you to know that you're getting that from the
Appreciate
audience. And thank you from all of us at NICABM for being with us. And thank you to all of you who tuned in. And thank you so much for your time.
You are welcome. Thank you.
All right. We're all going to sign off and say goodbye for now. Okay. Bye-bye.